Hey everyone, I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know a lot of you use this video to fall asleep, so before we start, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you from and what time is it there? Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and just relax. The music box that played itself. I still get chills when I think about this story. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why some childhood memories never leave you. I was 6 years old when we moved into my grandmother's old house. The place smelled like dust and old flowers. My parents said I could pick any room I wanted for my bedroom. Most kids would have been excited, but something felt wrong about that house from the very first day. I chose the room at the end of the hallway. It was small but had a big window that looked out into the backyard. What I didn't know was that this room came with something extra, something that would change my life forever. On my dresser there was an old music box. It was made of dark wood and had a tiny ballerina inside. When you opened the lid, the ballerina would spin around and around. The music it played was soft and pretty. At least it was pretty during the day. My mom told me the music box belonged to my grandmother when she was a little girl. She said it was very special and that I should take good care of it. I loved the music box during the day, but at night everything changed. The first night in my new room, I woke up to the sound of music. It was that same soft melody from the music box. But I knew I hadn't opened it before going to bed. I sat up in my bed and looked at the dresser. The music box was closed, but the music was still playing. I got out of bed and walked over to the dresser. As I got closer, the music stopped. I opened the music box, but nothing happened. The ballerina just sat there, not moving. I thought maybe I had been dreaming. The next night, it happened again. This time, I was sure I wasn't dreaming. The music woke me up at exactly 3:17 in the morning. I know because I looked at my alarm clock. The music box was playing that same song, but the lid was still closed. I ran to my parents' room and told them about the music. My dad came to my room with me. He looked at the music box and said it was just my imagination. But I knew what I heard. For the next week, the music box played every single night at 3:17. I started to get scared. I didn't want to sleep in my room anymore. But my parents said I was being silly. Then one night, something different happened. I woke up to the music as usual. But this time, when I looked at the music box, the lid was open. The tiny ballerina was spinning around and around, even though no one had wound it up. I watched in horror as the ballerina spun faster and faster. The music got louder and louder. Then suddenly, everything stopped. The ballerina stopped spinning. The music stopped playing. And the lid slammed shut by itself. That's when I saw her. Standing in the corner of my room was a little girl. She looked about my age, but her skin was pale white. She was wearing an old-fashioned dress that looked just like the one the ballerina was wearing. Her eyes were completely black. The little girl stared at me for what felt like hours. Then she slowly walked over to the music box. She reached out with her small hand and touched the lid. The music started playing again. She looked at me and smiled. But it wasn't a nice smile. It was the kind of smile that made my blood feel cold. Then she spoke in a voice that sounded like whispers in the wind. "Thank you for taking care of my music box," she said. "Now I can play forever." I screamed as loud as I could. My parents came running into my room. But when they turned on the lights, the little girl was gone. The music box was closed and silent. My parents said I had a nightmare, but I knew it was real. The next morning, I begged them to get rid of the music box. I told them about the little girl, but they didn't believe me. That night, I decided to stay awake. I wanted to prove that I wasn't making it up. At 3:17, the music started again. But this time, my parents heard it too. They came into my room and saw the music box playing by itself. My dad grabbed the music box and threw it in the trash outside. He said we would never talk about it again. But that didn't stop what happened next. Even without the music box, I could still hear the music every night at 3:17. And sometimes, just sometimes, I would see the little girl standing in the corner of my room. She would smile that cold smile and whisper, "You can't get rid of me that easily." We moved out of that house 2 months later. My parents never told me why, but I knew. They had finally seen what I had been seeing all along. To this day, whenever I hear music box melodies, I get that same cold feeling. And every night at 3:17, I wake up just for a second, listening for that familiar tune. The voice in the school basement. This happened when I was in 7th grade. Our school was really old, built back in the 1940s. It had 3 floors and a basement where they kept all the old supplies and broken desks. Students weren't supposed to go down to the basement without permission. But you know how kids are. The more you tell them not to do something, the more they want to do it. My friend Jake was always getting into trouble. He was the kind of kid who would eat a worm just to make the girls scream. So when he dared me to go down to the basement with him during lunch, I should have said no. But I didn't want him to think I was scared. We waited until the hallway was empty. Then we snuck down the stairs to the basement door. It was one of those heavy metal doors that made a loud creaking sound when you opened it. The basement was dark and smelled like old books and dust. Jake had brought a flashlight from his backpack. We could see stacks of old desks and chairs everywhere. There were also boxes full of old textbooks and supplies. "This place is creepy," I whispered to Jake. "Don't be such a baby," he said, but I could tell he was nervous too. We walked around for a few minutes looking at all the old stuff. That's when we heard it. A voice calling from somewhere deep in the basement. "Help me," the voice said. It sounded like a young girl, maybe our age. Jake and I looked at each other. We both heard it clearly. "Who's there?" Jake called out. "Please help me," the voice said again. It was coming from behind a stack of old desks in the far corner. We walked toward the voice, our hearts beating fast. As we got closer, the voice got clearer. "I'm trapped," she said. "I can't get out." We moved the desks out of the way and found a small door in the wall. It looked like it led to some kind of storage room. The voice was coming from behind that door. "Are you stuck in there?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "I've been here for so long. Please let me out." Jake tried to open the door, but it was locked. There was no key anywhere. "How did you get locked in there?" Jake asked. "I was playing hide and seek," she said. "I hid in here and someone locked the door. I've been calling for help, but no one comes down here." I felt really bad for her. She sounded so scared and lonely. "We'll go get help," I told her. "We'll find a teacher with a key." "No," she said quickly. "Don't leave me alone again. Please don't go." Her voice sounded desperate, almost panicked. "But we need to get a key," Jake said. "There's another way," she said. "If you can find the old janitor's keys, they're hanging on a hook by the furnace. Please, I just want to go home." Jake and I looked around until we found the furnace. Sure enough, there was a ring of old keys hanging on a hook nearby. We took them back to the door. The third key we tried worked. The door opened with a loud click. But when we opened the door, no one was there. The room was tiny, more like a closet. There were some old cleaning supplies on shelves, but that was it. No girl. No one at all. "Where did she go?" I asked. "Hello?" Jake called into the empty room. No answer. We looked around the entire basement, but we didn't find anyone. It was like the girl had just disappeared. We ran back upstairs and never talked about what happened. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Later that day, I decided to ask Mr. Peterson, our history teacher, about the basement. He had worked at the school for over 20 years. If anyone would know about strange things happening, it would be him. "Mr. Peterson," I said after class, "has anyone ever gotten trapped in the basement?" He looked at me with a strange expression. "Why do you ask?" he said. I told him about hearing the voice, but I didn't mention that Jake and I had actually gone down there. Mr. Peterson was quiet for a long time. Then he closed his classroom door and sat down at his desk. "There was a girl," he said quietly, "about 15 years ago. Her name was Sarah Miller. She was in 7th grade just like you." My heart started beating faster. "What happened to her?" I asked. "She went missing during school hours," he said. "One day she was here and the next day she wasn't. The police searched everywhere, including the basement. They never found her." I felt sick to my stomach. "Some people think she ran away," Mr. Peterson continued, "but her parents said she would never do that. She loved school and had lots of friends." "Do you think something bad happened to her?" I asked. Mr. Peterson looked at me seriously. "I think some questions are better left unanswered," he said, "and I think you should stay out of the basement." I never went back down to the basement after that day. But sometimes when I walk past the basement door, I swear I can hear a faint voice calling for help. And I always wonder if Sarah Miller is still down there, waiting for someone to let her out. The camping trip that changed everything. I was 15 when my family decided to go camping for the first time. My dad had bought a new tent and wanted to try it out. My mom wasn't too excited about sleeping outside, but she agreed to go. We drove for about 2 hours to get to the campground. It was called Pine Lake Campground, and it was supposed to be really nice. When we got there, I could see why. There were tall pine trees everywhere and a beautiful lake in the middle. We set up our tent near the lake, but not too close to the other campers. My dad said he wanted some peace and quiet. Looking back now, I wish we had camped closer to other people. The first day was great. We went fishing and swimming in the lake. We cooked hot dogs over the campfire and made s'mores. It felt like the perfect family vacation. But when night came, everything changed. We were sitting around the campfire telling stories when we heard something in the woods behind us. It sounded like footsteps walking through the leaves. Probably just a deer, my dad said. We kept talking, but the footsteps continued. They seemed to be walking in a circle around our campsite. That doesn't sound like a deer, my mom said. She was getting nervous. The footsteps stopped for a while. We thought maybe the animal had moved on. But then we heard something else. Voices. They were coming from the same direction as the footsteps, but they were too far away to understand what they were saying. It sounded like 2 or 3 people having a conversation. Hello? My dad called out. Is someone there? The voices stopped immediately. Maybe it's other campers, I suggested. At this time of night? My mom said. And why would they be walking around in the dark woods instead of staying at their campsite? We decided to ignore it and go to bed. But as we were putting out the campfire, we heard the voices again. This time they were closer. Much closer. We could make out some of the words. They were talking about us. 3 of them. One voice said, "By the lake," said another. "After they're asleep," said a third voice. My parents looked at each other with worried expressions. "Get in the tent," my dad whispered. Now. We quickly got into our tent and zipped it shut. My dad told us to be very quiet and listen. For about an hour we didn't hear anything. Just the normal sounds of the forest at night. Owls hooting, leaves rustling in the wind. We started to relax a little. Then we heard the footsteps again. This time they were right outside our tent. The footsteps walked slowly around our tent in a complete circle. We could hear whoever it was breathing heavily. Then the footsteps stopped right at the front of our tent where the zipper was. We held our breath and waited. Someone started to unzip our tent. The zipper moved down very slowly, making that loud zipping sound. We could see a hand pushing the tent flap open. My dad grabbed his flashlight and turned it on, pointing it at the tent opening. But no one was there. The tent was unzipped, but there was nobody outside. We could see the campfire area clearly, but it was empty. "Who's out there?" my dad yelled. No answer. He climbed out of the tent with his flashlight and looked around the entire campsite. Nothing. No sign that anyone had been there at all. But we all knew someone had unzipped our tent. We all saw it happening. My dad zipped the tent back up and got inside. "We're leaving first thing in the morning," he said. None of us slept that night. We took turns keeping watch, but we never saw or heard anything else. As soon as the sun came up, we packed our stuff and left. On the drive home, we stopped at a gas station to get some snacks. While my parents were inside paying, I overheard 2 men talking by the gas pumps. "You hear about those missing campers?" one man said. "Which ones?" the other man asked. "The family that disappeared from Pine Lake Campground last month. They found their tent and all their stuff, but no sign of the people." My blood went cold. "That's the 3rd family to go missing from that campground this year," the first man said. "Maybe people should stop camping there," the second man said. "Yeah, but the police won't close it down. They say there's no evidence of foul play." When my parents came back to the car, I told them what I had overheard. My dad's face went white. "We're never talking about this camping trip again," he said. And we never did. But sometimes, late at night, I think about those voices in the woods. And I wonder what would have happened if we had stayed asleep when someone unzipped our tent. The old woman next door. When I was in high school, we lived in a small house on Maple Street. It was a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew each other, except for the old woman who lived in the house next to ours. Her name was Mrs. Hendricks, and she had lived there for over 40 years. She was probably in her 80s, with long gray hair that she always kept in a bun. She never talked to any of the neighbors and rarely left her house. The strange thing about Mrs. Hendricks was her routine. Every single day at exactly 6 p.m., she would come outside and water her garden. She had the most beautiful flowers you've ever seen. Roses, tulips, daisies, and many others I couldn't identify. But here's what was weird. She would talk to her flowers while she watered them. Not just a few words here and there. She would have full conversations with them as if they were talking back to her. At first, my family thought it was kind of cute. Lots of people talk to their plants, right? But as time went on, we realized there was something different about the way Mrs. Hendricks talked to her flowers. She would ask them questions and then pause as if waiting for an answer. Then she would nod and respond to whatever she thought they had said. "Yes, Margaret, I know you're thirsty," she would say to a rose bush. "Don't worry, William, I won't forget to feed you tomorrow," she would tell a patch of daisies. She had names for all of her flowers, and she seemed to believe they were actually talking to her. My mom tried to be friendly with Mrs. Hendricks. She would wave and say hello whenever she saw her. But Mrs. Hendricks would just stare at her with cold, empty eyes and then go back to talking to her flowers. One day, I was mowing our lawn when I heard Mrs. Hendricks having a more intense conversation with her flowers than usual. "No, no, no," she was saying. "We can't do that. It's not right." She sounded upset, almost arguing with her flowers. "I know you're hungry," she continued, "but we have to wait. We have to be patient." I stopped mowing and listened more carefully. "The boy next door would be perfect," I heard her say. "He's young and strong. But his parents would notice if he disappeared." My heart started beating faster. Was she talking about me? "Yes, I know it's been a long time since you've had fresh food," she said, "but we can't be careless." I quickly finished mowing and went inside. I told my parents what I had heard, but they said I was probably just misunderstanding what she was saying. But I knew what I had heard. That night, I looked out my bedroom window at Mrs. Hendricks' garden. In the moonlight, her flowers looked different. They seemed bigger and more colorful than they should be. And they were moving slightly, even though there was no wind. The next day, I noticed something else strange. There was a new flower in Mrs. Hendricks' garden. It was huge and bright red, unlike anything I had ever seen before. And it seemed to be growing right where her compost pile used to be. Over the next few weeks, I kept watching Mrs. Hendricks in her garden. The new flower kept getting bigger and bigger. And Mrs. Hendricks seemed to pay special attention to it. "You're growing so well, Richard," I heard her say to the new flower one evening. "You were always such a good boy, Richard." That was the name of the mailman who had disappeared 3 weeks earlier. The police said he had probably just quit his job and moved away without telling anyone. But his family said that wasn't like him at all. I started to put the pieces together. Mrs. Hendricks had been living alone for 40 years. No one had ever seen her go to the grocery store or have any visitors. What was she eating? How was she surviving? And why were her flowers so much more beautiful than anyone else's? That's when I remembered something my grandmother had told me years ago. She said that some people knew secret ways to make plants grow better. Old ways that most people had forgotten about. But the secret ingredient wasn't fertilizer or plant food. It was blood. Human blood. I knew I had to do something. But who would believe me? I was just a teenager, and Mrs. Hendricks was a harmless old lady who loved gardening. One night, I decided to sneak over to her garden and get some proof. I waited until after midnight when I was sure she was asleep. Then I climbed over the fence between our yards. Up close, her flowers were even more beautiful and strange than they looked from my window. They seemed to glow in the moonlight, and they were definitely moving, swaying back and forth like they were dancing. I walked over to the new red flower, the one she called Richard. As I got closer, I could smell something sweet and sickly like rotting meat mixed with perfume. I knelt down next to the flower and started digging around its roots with my hands. The soil was soft and dark, almost black. That's when my fingers touched something hard. I dug deeper and pulled out what looked like a piece of bone. A human bone. I dropped it and stumbled backward. That's when I heard Mrs. Hendricks' voice behind me. "I told them you would be perfect," she said calmly. I turned around and saw her standing by her back door. But she looked different than usual. Her eyes were glowing green in the darkness. And she was smiling, showing teeth that were too sharp and too white. "They've been asking about you for weeks," she continued. "Young blood makes the most beautiful flowers." I ran as fast as I could back to my house. I woke up my parents and told them everything. At first they didn't believe me, but when I showed them the bone I had found, they called the police. The police searched Mrs. Hendricks' garden the next day. They found the remains of 7 people buried under her flowers. The mailman, a door-to-door salesman, a pizza delivery driver, and 4 others who had been reported missing over the past few years. Mrs. Hendricks was arrested, but she died in custody before her trial. The police said it was a heart attack, but the guards said she kept talking to invisible flowers in her cell until the very end. They tore down her house and paved over her garden. But sometimes when I drive past that spot, I swear I can still see flowers growing up through the cracks in the pavement. And I always remember what she said about young blood making the most beautiful flowers. The highway rest stop. This happened to me 3 years ago when I was driving home from college for spring break. It was about a 7-hour drive, and I had left pretty late in the evening. I figured I could drive through the night and get home by morning. Everything was going fine for the first few hours. I had my music playing and plenty of coffee to keep me awake. But around 2 a.m. I started getting really tired. My eyes were getting heavy and I was having trouble focusing on the road. I knew I needed to pull over and rest for a while. I had passed several rest stops earlier, but I hadn't seen one in almost an hour. Finally, I saw a sign that said, "Rest Area 1 mile." I pulled off the highway and into the rest stop. It was one of those small, basic ones with just a parking lot, some picnic tables, and a small building with bathrooms and vending machines. There were only 2 other cars in the parking lot. I parked near the building and decided to grab a soda from the vending machine before taking a nap in my car. The building was lit by fluorescent lights that kept flickering on and off. It gave the whole place a creepy, abandoned feeling. But I figured it was just an old building that needed some repairs. I walked over to the vending machine and put in my money. As I was waiting for my soda to drop down, I heard voices coming from the bathroom area. At first, I thought it was just other travelers talking. But as I listened more carefully, I realized the voices sounded strange. They were too quiet and seemed to be whispering about something. I got my soda and started walking back to my car. But as I passed by the bathroom, I could hear the voices more clearly. "He's alone." One voice whispered. "Perfect," whispered another. "Wait until he falls asleep," said a third voice. I stopped walking. Were they talking about me? I looked around the parking lot. There was my car and the 2 other cars I had seen when I arrived. But I didn't see any people anywhere. I walked closer to the bathroom door and listened. The voices were definitely coming from inside the men's room. "Young and healthy," one voice said. "Won't be missed for hours," said another. That's when I realized they were definitely talking about me. But who were they? And how did they know I was alone? I decided to get out of there as fast as possible. But as I started walking quickly toward my car, I heard the bathroom door open behind me. I didn't turn around to look. I just kept walking faster. "Excuse me," a voice called out behind me. I ignored it and kept walking. "Hey buddy," the voice called out again, louder this time. I was almost at my car. I pulled out my keys and unlocked the door. "Wait up," the voice said. It was much closer now. I got in my car and quickly locked the doors. Then I looked in my rearview mirror. There was a man standing about 10 feet behind my car. He was tall and thin, wearing dark clothes. But the weird thing was I couldn't see his face clearly. It was like it was blurred or covered in shadows, even though the parking lot lights were shining right on him. I started my car and put it in reverse, but the man didn't move out of the way. I honked my horn, but he just stood there. I rolled down my window a little bit and called out, "Excuse me, I need to back up." The man tilted his head to one side like he was listening to something. Then he spoke in a voice that didn't sound quite human. "Why don't you stay a while?" he said. "We'd love to get to know you better." That's when I noticed there were more people standing in the shadows around the parking lot. I couldn't see them clearly, but I could see their shapes. There were at least 4 or 5 of them, all just standing and watching my car. I put my car in drive and drove around the man standing behind me. As I drove toward the exit, I saw more shadowy figures standing near the picnic tables and along the edge of the parking lot. All of them were watching me leave. I drove back onto the highway as fast as I could. My heart was beating so hard I thought it might explode. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town, which was about 50 miles away. I pulled into a well-lit gas station and called 911. I told the police about the strange people at the rest stop and how they seemed to be planning something bad. The police said they would send someone to check it out. They called me back an hour later and said they had found the rest stop, but it was completely empty. No people, no cars, nothing. But here's the really weird part. They said the rest stop had been closed for renovations for the past 6 months. There was supposed to be construction equipment and barriers blocking the entrance. But I know what I saw. I know I was there. I have the receipt from the vending machine to prove it. The police said I was probably just tired and confused. They suggested that I had stopped at a different rest area and just remembered it wrong. But I know that's not true. A few weeks later, I decided to research that rest stop online. I found an old news article from 5 years ago. It said that 3 people had gone missing from that exact rest stop over a period of 2 years. All of them were traveling alone late at night. The police had investigated, but they never found any evidence of what happened to those people. Eventually, they closed the case and assumed the people had just chosen to disappear. But I think I know what really happened to them. I think they met the same shadowy figures that I met. But unlike me, they didn't drive away fast enough. I still drive that highway sometimes when I'm going to and from school. But I always make sure to stop for gas and rest in well-populated areas during daylight hours. And I never, ever stop at rest areas alone at night. Because I know they're still out there, waiting in the shadows for the next lone traveler to pull off the highway looking for a place to rest. The babysitting job gone wrong. I was 16 when I started babysitting to earn some extra money. Most of the families in our neighborhood knew me, so I got a lot of jobs. The kids were usually pretty easy to watch and the parents paid well. But there was one job that I'll never forget. And I'll never babysit again because of what happened. Mrs. Peterson called me on a Friday afternoon. She said she and her husband needed a babysitter for their 7-year-old daughter, Emma, the next evening. They were going to a wedding and wouldn't be back until late. I had never babysit for the Petersons before, but I knew who they were. They lived in a big house on the other side of town. Mrs. Peterson said she would pay me $20 an hour, which was more than I usually made. I should have wondered why she was paying so much. Saturday evening, I drove over to their house. It was a beautiful 2-story home with a big front yard and lots of trees. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson met me at the door. They seemed like a normal, nice couple. Emma is upstairs in her room, Mrs. Peterson told me. She's been playing quietly all day. She might be a little shy at first, but she's a very good girl. They showed me around the house and gave me all the important phone numbers. They said Emma should go to bed by 8 p.m. and that I could help myself to anything in the kitchen. There's just one thing, Mr. Peterson said as they were getting ready to leave. Emma has a very active imagination. She might tell you some strange stories or say she sees things that aren't there. Just ignore it and she'll be fine. Sometimes she talks about having friends that no one else can see, Mrs. Peterson added. It's completely normal for kids her age. Just play along with her if she mentions them. I said that sounded fine. I had babysit kids with imaginary friends before. After the Petersons left, I went upstairs to check on Emma. Her bedroom door was closed, so I knocked softly. Emma? It's Sarah, your babysitter. Can I come in? Okay, a small voice said from inside the room. I opened the door and saw Emma sitting on her bed with several dolls arranged around her. She was a cute little girl with blonde hair and big blue eyes. Hi Emma, I said. What are you playing? I'm having a tea party with my friends, she said. I looked at the dolls on her bed. They were old-fashioned dolls with porcelain faces and fancy dresses. Those are beautiful dolls, I said. What are their names? Emma pointed to each doll as she spoke. This is Mary and this is Susan and this is Jennifer. They used to live in this house a long time ago. Oh, that's a nice story, I said. Do you want to come downstairs and have some real food? I can make you a sandwich or some mac and cheese. Can my friends come too? Emma asked. Sure, I said. Bring your dolls if you want. Emma carefully picked up each doll and carried them downstairs. She set them up at the kitchen table while I made her a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. As we were eating, Emma started talking to her dolls as if they were real people. Mary says she likes peanut butter too, Emma told me. That's nice, I said. Susan says she remembers when this kitchen looked different. It used to have blue walls instead of white. I thought that was an interesting detail for a 7-year-old to make up. But kids have good imaginations. Jennifer says she's glad I live in her old room now, Emma continued. She says it was lonely being up there by herself for so long. After dinner, I suggested we watch a movie in the living room. Emma brought her dolls with her and set them up on the couch. We were watching a Disney movie when Emma suddenly got very quiet. Sarah, she whispered, do you see them? See what, honey? I asked. My friends, they're not in the dolls anymore. They're standing right there. She pointed to an empty corner of the living room. I looked where she was pointing, but I didn't see anything. That's nice, Emma, I said. Tell them I said hello. They want to know if you can see them, Emma said. I'm sorry, but I can't see them, I told her. Emma looked disappointed. Mary says most grown-ups can't see them. But Jennifer says some people can if they try really hard. I was starting to feel a little uncomfortable, but I tried to stay calm. Emma's parents had warned me that she had an active imagination. Maybe we should get you ready for bed, I suggested. It's almost 8 o'clock. Emma nodded and gathered up her dolls. We went upstairs to her bedroom and I helped her brush her teeth and put on her pajamas. As I was tucking her into bed, Emma grabbed my arm. Sarah, she said seriously. My friends want to tell you something important. What's that? I asked. They say you need to be careful tonight. They say something bad is going to happen. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you mean, Emma? They won't tell me exactly what, but they say you should stay awake and keep the doors locked. And if you hear strange noises, don't go check what they are. I tried to smile and act like it was just a game. Okay, Emma, I'll be careful. Now you need to go to sleep. I turned off her light and went back downstairs. I tried to watch TV, but I couldn't stop thinking about what Emma had said. Why would a 7-year-old make up a story about something bad happening? Around 10 p.m., I heard a noise outside. It sounded like footsteps walking around the house. I looked out the front window, but I didn't see anyone. The noise stopped. A few minutes later, I heard it again. This time it sounded like someone was trying the door handles on the back patio. I checked to make sure all the doors were locked. They were. The footsteps continued for about 10 more minutes, then stopped completely. I thought maybe it was just an animal or something blowing in the wind. But then, I heard Emma's voice calling from upstairs. "Sarah, Sarah, help me." My heart started pounding. I rushed up the stairs, taking them two at a time. Emma's bedroom door was open, and I could see her sitting up in bed, pointing toward her window. "They're outside," she whispered when I reached her. "My friends are trying to warn the bad man to go away, but he won't listen." I went to her window and peered through the curtains. In the dim light from the street lamp, I could make out a dark figure standing in the backyard, just at the edge of the shadows. The person seemed to be looking up at Emma's window. "Emma, get away from the window," I said quietly, pulling her back toward her bed. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. "Don't call anyone yet," Emma said urgently. "Jennifer says he'll get angry if he sees lights or hears talking. She says we need to wait." "Wait for what?" I whispered. "For him to leave. He's done this before. Jennifer remembers." I crouched down next to Emma's bed, keeping my phone ready. Through the thin walls of the old house, I could hear footsteps again, slow, deliberate steps that seemed to circle the house. Emma clutched one of her dolls tightly. "Mary says he used to come when she lived here too. But he never got inside because they always warned the grown-ups." "Emma, I need you to tell me, how long do your friends say we need to wait?" "Until he gets tired and goes away. Susan says it usually takes about an hour. But we have to be very, very quiet." The footsteps stopped directly below Emma's window. I held my breath, pulling Emma closer to me. We sat in complete silence for what felt like forever. Then, slowly, the footsteps resumed, moving away from the house. I waited another 10 minutes before carefully looking out the window again. The backyard was empty. "He's gone," Emma whispered. "My friends say it's safe now." I waited another hour before calling Emma's parents. When I told them what happened, they were silent for a long moment. "Sarah," Emma's mother finally said, "we should have warned you. We've had problems with someone prowling around the house before. That's actually why we installed all those new locks. Emma has always seemed to know when he's coming. But how could she possibly? We don't know. The police think she might hear things we miss, or notice patterns we don't see. She's always been perceptive." After her parents came home, Emma hugged me goodbye. "Thank you for listening to my friends," she said. "Not all babysitters do." As I walked to my car, I looked back at the old Victorian house. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw small faces in the upstairs windows, watching to make sure I got safely to my car. I never babysat for Emma again, not because I was scared of her, but because I realized that house needed someone braver than me. Someone who could truly see what Emma saw, and help protect her from whatever darkness occasionally came calling in the night. The phone calls from the dead. This story happened to my older sister when she was in college. But it scared our whole family so much that we still don't like to talk about it. My sister Rachel was a sophomore at State University. She lived in a dorm with her roommate, Jessica. They had been best friends since high school and were excited to room together. Jessica was one of those people who was friends with everyone. She was always laughing and making jokes. She was also the kind of person who would help anyone who needed it, even if she didn't know them very well. One Friday night in October, Jessica went to a party at a fraternity house off campus. Rachel decided to stay in the dorm and study for a test she had on Monday. Jessica said she would be back by midnight. But midnight came and went and she didn't come home. Rachel wasn't too worried at first. College parties sometimes went late, and Jessica was known to lose track of time when she was having fun. But when Jessica still wasn't back by 2 a.m., Rachel started to get concerned. She tried calling Jessica's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Rachel called a few of Jessica's other friends, but none of them had seen her at the party. In fact, they said Jessica had never shown up at all. By morning, Rachel was really worried. She called Jessica's parents and then called the campus police. The police started an investigation immediately. They searched Jessica's car, which was still in the dorm parking lot. They talked to everyone who knew her. But there was no sign of Jessica anywhere. After a week, the police expanded their search to the surrounding area. They brought in search dogs and volunteers to help look through the woods and fields around campus. On the 10th day after Jessica disappeared, they found her body in a creek about 5 miles from campus. The police said she had been murdered, but they never found out who did it or why. Rachel was devastated. She couldn't understand how someone could hurt Jessica, who had never been mean to anyone in her life. The funeral was terrible. Jessica's parents were destroyed by grief. Rachel felt guilty for not going to the party with Jessica that night. Maybe if she had been there, things would have been different. After the funeral, Rachel moved to a different dorm room. She couldn't bear to sleep in the room she had shared with Jessica. But about 2 weeks after Jessica's funeral, something strange started happening. Rachel's cell phone started ringing at exactly 3:17 a.m. every night. The first time it happened, Rachel thought it might be someone calling with news about Jessica's case. But when she answered the phone, no one was there. Just silence. The second night, the same thing happened. The phone rang at 3:17 a.m., but when Rachel answered, there was no one on the line. On the third night, Rachel decided not to answer the phone. But it kept ringing for almost 10 minutes straight. The next morning, Rachel checked her call history. According to her phone, the calls were coming from Jessica's number. But that was impossible. Jessica was dead, and the police had never found her cell phone. Rachel called the police and told them about the strange calls. They said it was probably just a prank or a phone company error. They told her to change her phone number. But Rachel couldn't bring herself to change her number. What if Jessica was somehow trying to contact her? What if she had something important to say? The phone calls continued every night at exactly 3:17 a.m. And after about a week, something different started happening. Instead of just silence on the other end, Rachel started hearing a faint voice. "Rachel," the voice whispered. It sounded like Jessica, but far away and fuzzy, like a bad connection. "Jessica?" Rachel whispered back. "Is that really you?" "Rachel, you have to listen to me," the voice said. "I don't have much time." "Where are you?" Rachel asked. "What happened to you?" "I can't tell you everything," Jessica's voice said. "But you're in danger. He knows we were friends. He's watching you." "Who?" Rachel asked. "Who's watching me?" But the line went dead. The next night at 3:17 a.m., the phone rang again. "Rachel," Jessica's voice said immediately when Rachel answered. "You have to be careful. Don't walk alone at night. Don't trust anyone you don't know well." "Jessica, I need to know who did this to you," Rachel said. "He drives a blue pickup truck," Jessica said. "He works at the gas station on Elm Street. He followed me from the party." "What party?" Rachel asked. "You never made it to the party." "I stopped to get gas first," Jessica said. "He saw me there and followed me. When I realized he was following me, I tried to drive back to campus. But he ran me off the road." Rachel was crying now. "I'm so sorry, Jessica. I should have come with you." "It's not your fault," Jessica said. "But you have to tell the police what I told you." "And Rachel?" "Yes. Don't let him know that I told you. He's still watching. He's still dangerous." The line went dead again. The next morning, Rachel called the police and told them everything Jessica had said during the phone calls. At first, they didn't believe her. But Rachel begged them to at least check out the gas station on Elm Street. 2 days later, the police arrested a man named David Miller who worked at that gas station. He drove a blue pickup truck, just like Jessica had said. When they searched his truck, they found Jessica's cell phone hidden under the seat. They also found evidence that linked him to 2 other missing women from nearby towns. David Miller confessed to killing Jessica and the other women. He said he would follow young women who stopped at his gas station late at night. If they were alone, he would follow them and attack them. The phone calls from Jessica stopped after David Miller was arrested. But Rachel kept her same phone number, just in case Jessica ever needed to contact her again. Because if the dead can call the living to help solve their own murder, then death isn't really the end. It's just the beginning of a different kind of existence. The mirror in the attic. My family moved into an old Victorian house when I was 13. The house was built in 1897 and had been owned by the same family for over 100 years. When the last family member died, her relatives decided to sell it. The house was beautiful but needed a lot of work. My parents got it for a good price because most people didn't want to deal with all the repairs it needed. I loved the house from the moment I saw it. It had high ceilings, fancy woodwork, and lots of interesting rooms. But the best part was the attic. The attic was huge and filled with all kinds of old furniture and belongings from the previous owners. There were antique chairs, old books, vintage clothing, and lots of other fascinating items. My parents said I could use the attic as my own space if I wanted to. I decided to turn part of it into a hangout room where I could read and listen to music. As I was cleaning out one corner of the attic, I found an old mirror covered by a dusty sheet. When I pulled the sheet off, I saw that it was a beautiful antique mirror with an ornate silver frame. The mirror was about 4 feet tall and 2 feet wide. It looked like it belonged in a fancy mansion or a museum. I couldn't understand why someone would just leave it covered up in the attic. I cleaned the mirror and hung it on the wall in my new attic room. It looked perfect there and it made the room feel more elegant. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. I spent hours in the attic reading and doing homework. The mirror just seemed like a nice decoration. But then I started noticing strange things. Sometimes, when I looked in the mirror, my reflection seemed to move a split second after I did. Like there was a tiny delay between my movements and what I saw in the mirror. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. Maybe the old glass was warped or something. But then I started seeing other things in the mirror that weren't really there. I would be reading a book, and when I glanced up at the mirror, I would see someone standing behind me. But when I turned around, no one was there. This happened several times over the course of a few weeks. I always saw the same person in the mirror, a young woman with long dark hair wearing a white dress. She never did anything threatening. She would just stand there watching me. Sometimes she would move her lips like she was trying to say something, but I couldn't hear any sound. I told my parents about what I was seeing, but they said it was probably just the old glass playing tricks on my eyes. They suggested that maybe I was spending too much time alone in the attic, but I knew what I was seeing was real. One evening, I decided to do some research about the house and its previous owners. I went online and searched for information about the family that had lived there. What I found made my blood run cold. The house had originally been built by a man named William Harrison for his wife, Margaret. They had lived there happily for several years and had one daughter named Elizabeth. When Elizabeth was 22 years old, she had died in a tragic accident. According to the newspaper article I found, she had fallen down the stairs and broken her neck. But here's the part that really scared me. The article included a photograph of Elizabeth Harrison. She was the young woman I had been seeing in the mirror. The next day, I went back up to the attic and looked more carefully at the mirror. I noticed that there were some words engraved in small letters along the bottom of the frame. In loving memory of Elizabeth Harrison, 1875 to 1897. The mirror wasn't just an antique decoration. It was a memorial to the young woman who had died in the house. That night, I had a vivid dream about Elizabeth. In the dream, she was standing in front of the mirror, brushing her long dark hair. She looked sad and lonely. "I've been waiting for someone to see me," she said in the dream. "I've been trapped in this mirror for so long. How can I help you?" I asked. "Find out the truth about what happened to me," she said. "My death wasn't an accident." I woke up with chills running down my spine. The next day, I went to the local library and looked up more information about Elizabeth Harrison's death. I found several newspaper articles from 1897. The first article said that Elizabeth had died from a fall down the stairs. But as I read more articles, I found some disturbing details. One article mentioned that Elizabeth had been engaged to marry a man named Thomas Wright. But 2 weeks before her death, she had broken off the engagement. Another article said that Thomas Wright had been questioned by police about Elizabeth's death, but he had an alibi for the time when she died. But the most interesting article was one I found from a different newspaper. This article suggested that Elizabeth might not have fallen down the stairs by accident. It said that she had been found at the bottom of the stairs, but her injuries were not consistent with a simple fall. The article implied that someone might have pushed her. That night, I dreamed about Elizabeth again. This time, she showed me what had really happened on the night she died. In the dream, I saw Elizabeth getting ready for bed in her bedroom. She was brushing her hair in front of the same mirror that was now in my attic. Suddenly, Thomas Wright appeared in her room. He was angry about their broken engagement. He demanded to know why she had called off their wedding. Elizabeth told him that she had discovered he was only marrying her for her family's money. She said she could never marry someone who didn't truly love her. Thomas became furious. He grabbed Elizabeth by the shoulders and shook her. When she tried to get away from him, he pushed her toward the bedroom door. Elizabeth lost her balance and fell backward down the stairs. Thomas stood at the top of the stairs and watched her fall. Then he quickly left through a back door. When I woke up from this dream, I knew I had to do something. Elizabeth's spirit had been trapped in that mirror for over 100 years, waiting for someone to learn the truth about her death. I spent the next few days researching Thomas Wright. I found out that he had left town shortly after Elizabeth's death and had never returned. He had eventually married another wealthy woman in a different state. I also found Elizabeth's grave in the old cemetery across town. Her headstone said, "Beloved daughter, taken too soon." I decided to visit Elizabeth's grave and tell her that I knew the truth about what had happened to her. I brought flowers and sat by her headstone for a while. "I know Thomas Wright killed you," I said out loud. "I know it wasn't an accident." That night, I had one more dream about Elizabeth. But this time, she looked peaceful and happy. "Thank you," she said. "Now I can finally rest." When I woke up the next morning and went to the attic, the mirror was gone. I searched the entire attic, but it was nowhere to be found.
I asked my parents if they had moved it, but they said they hadn't been in the attic for days. I never saw the mirror again. And I never saw Elizabeth again either. But sometimes, when I'm in the attic reading, I feel a gentle presence watching over me. Not in a scary way, but in a protective way. I think Elizabeth's spirit is finally at peace. And I think she's grateful that someone finally knew the truth about what happened to her. Sometimes the dead just want their stories to be told. And sometimes, a mirror can be more than just a reflection. Sometimes, it can be a window into the past. The night shift at the hospital. I got my first job when I was 18, right after I graduated from high school. It was a part-time position at the local hospital, working the night shift as a security guard. The hospital was pretty old, built back in the 1960s. It had that typical hospital smell of disinfectant and floor wax. During the day, it was busy with doctors, nurses, patients, and visitors. But at night, it became a very different place. My job was to walk around the hospital every hour and make sure all the doors were locked and everything was secure. Most of the time, it was pretty boring. I would just walk the halls with my flashlight, check the doors, and write down the time in my logbook. But there were some parts of the hospital that always made me feel uncomfortable. The worst was the old psychiatric wing on the 4th floor. It had been closed down about 10 years earlier when they built a new mental health facility across town. But the hospital still used some of the rooms for storage. The psychiatric wing had a different feeling than the rest of the hospital. Even though it was empty, it felt like there were people there. Sometimes I would hear sounds coming from the closed rooms, footsteps, voices, or doors closing. My supervisor, Mr. Garcia, told me that old buildings make lots of noises and I shouldn't worry about it. He said the sounds were probably just the heating system or the building settling. But I knew the difference between building noises and human noises. One night in November, I was doing my midnight rounds when I heard piano music coming from the 4th floor. It was a sad, slow song that echoed through the empty hallways. I knew there was an old piano in the psychiatric wing's recreation room. Patients used to play it during music therapy sessions. But there shouldn't have been anyone up there playing it at midnight. I took the elevator to the 4th floor and walked toward the recreation room. The piano music got louder as I got closer. When I reached the recreation room, I peered through the small window in the door. I could see the piano and someone was definitely sitting at it, playing. It was an elderly woman with gray hair wearing a hospital gown. Her back was turned to me so I couldn't see her face, but I could see her hands moving across the keys. I knocked on the door. "Excuse me," I called out. "You're not supposed to be here." The music stopped immediately. The woman turned around to look at me, but she didn't have a face. Where her face should have been, there was just smooth, blank skin. I screamed and ran back to the elevator as fast as I could. When I got back to the security office, I called Mr. Garcia and told him what I had seen. He came to the hospital right away and we both went up to the 4th floor together. The recreation room was empty. There was no one at the piano. But when Mr. Garcia checked the piano keys, he found fresh fingerprints on them. "Someone was definitely here," he said. "But all the doors to this wing are locked and you're the only one with keys." We searched the entire 4th floor, but we didn't find anyone. The next night, I heard the piano music again. This time, I decided not to investigate. I just made a note in my logbook and continued with my rounds. But the piano music continued every night for the next 2 weeks. Always the same sad song, always at the same time. I started asking some of the older nurses about the psychiatric wing. I wanted to know if anything strange had ever happened there when it was still in use. One nurse, Mrs. Henderson, had worked at the hospital for over 30 years. She remembered the psychiatric wing very well. There was a patient there named Margaret Wilson, she told me. She had been there for almost 20 years. She was a sweet old lady, but she had severe dementia. She didn't recognize her family anymore, and she rarely spoke to anyone. "What happened to her?" I asked. "The only thing that seemed to make her happy was playing the piano," Mrs. Henderson continued. "She would play the same song over and over again. It was something she had learned as a child before she got sick." "Did she die there?" I asked. Mrs. Henderson nodded sadly. "She died in her sleep one night about 5 years ago. It was actually kind of peaceful. She had played the piano that evening just like always. Then she went to bed and never woke up." "What song did she always play?" I asked. "I don't know the name of it," Mrs. Henderson said, "but it was very sad and beautiful. She would play it for hours sometimes." That night, when I heard the piano music again, I listened more carefully. I realized that it was the same song every time, just like Mrs. Henderson had described. I decided to face my fear and go back to the recreation room. Not to investigate, but to listen. I stood outside the door and listened to Margaret Wilson play her song. Even though I couldn't see her face, I could feel the sadness in her music. She was playing for an audience that was no longer there. When the song ended, I spoke quietly through the door. "That was beautiful, Margaret," I said. "Thank you for sharing your music." The piano was silent for a moment. Then I heard a different sound, the sound of someone crying softly. After that night, I never heard the piano music again. But sometimes, when I was walking through other parts of the hospital, I would catch a glimpse of an elderly woman in a hospital gown walking slowly down the hallway. She would always disappear around a corner before I could get a good look at her. I like to think that Margaret Wilson was finally able to move on after someone acknowledged her music. She had spent years playing the same song, waiting for someone to listen. And once someone finally heard her, she was able to find peace. Working the night shift at that hospital taught me that some people leave echoes of themselves behind when they die. Not scary echoes, but sad ones. Margaret Wilson wasn't trying to frighten anyone. She was just trying to share the one thing that had brought her joy during her final years. Sometimes the dead don't want to scare the living. Sometimes they just want to be remembered. The final message. This is the last story I'm going to tell you tonight. And it's the most important one because it happened to me just 3 months ago. My grandfather passed away last December. He was 87 years old and had been sick for a long time. We all knew it was coming, but it was still hard when it finally happened. Grandpa Joe had been like a second father to me. When my parents got divorced when I was 10, I spent a lot of time at his house. He taught me how to fish, how to fix things with my hands, and how to be a good person. After he died, I was really depressed. I felt like I had lost my best friend. My family was worried about me because I wasn't eating or sleeping well. About 2 weeks after the funeral, strange things started happening in my apartment. I would come home from work and find that items had been moved around. Not in a scary way, but in a way that reminded me of my grandfather. For example, I would leave a book on my coffee table, and when I came home, it would be on the bookshelf where it belonged. Grandpa Joe had always been neat and organized, and he used to constantly put things back where they were supposed to be. My TV would be turned to the History Channel, even though I never watched that channel. But it was my grandfather's favorite channel. He could watch World War II documentaries for hours. At first, I thought I was just being absent-minded because I was grieving. Maybe I was moving things and forgetting about it. But then more obvious things started happening. I would wake up in the morning and smell coffee brewing in my kitchen. But I didn't have a coffee maker. I had never even bought coffee for my apartment. When I went to the kitchen to investigate, there would be no coffee and no smell. But I know what I smelled. It was the exact same coffee that my grandfather used to make every morning. One evening, I was sitting on my couch feeling particularly sad about losing Grandpa Joe. I was looking through old photos of the two of us and crying. That's when I heard his voice. "Don't cry, kiddo," he said. It was definitely his voice, with that slight southern accent he had never lost. I looked around my apartment, but I was alone. "Grandpa," I said out loud. "I'm right here," he said. His voice seemed to be coming from the chair across from me, the same chair he used to sit in when he visited my apartment. "But you're dead," I said. "Well, that's true," he said with a chuckle. "But death isn't what I thought it would be. I'm still me, just in a different form." I couldn't see him, but I could hear him clearly. And somehow I wasn't scared. I was actually comforted. "I've been trying to get your attention for weeks," he continued. "Moving your things around, making coffee smells, turning on my favorite TV shows. I was hoping you'd figure out it was me." "Why are you here?" I asked. "Because I'm worried about you," he said. "You're not taking care of yourself. You're not eating enough, you're not sleeping enough, and you're isolating yourself from your friends and family. I miss you so much," I said, starting to cry again. "I know you do, kiddo. I miss you too. But that doesn't mean you should stop living your life." For the next hour, we had a conversation just like we used to when he was alive. He told me about what it was like being dead, which he said wasn't scary at all, and I told him about everything that had been happening in my life. "I need you to promise me something," he said finally. "What?" I asked. "Promise me you'll start taking care of yourself again. Eat good food, get enough sleep, and spend time with people who love you. Life is too short to waste it being sad all the time." "But what if I forget about you?" I asked. "You could never forget about me," he said. "All those memories we made together, all those lessons I taught you, all that love we shared, that's all still inside you. Death can't take that away." "Will I see you again?" I asked. "Not for a long time, I hope," he said. "You have a lot of living to do first. But when your time comes, I'll be waiting for you. We'll go fishing in the best lake you've ever seen." I felt a gentle touch on my shoulder, like someone patting me the way my grandfather used to do when I was upset. "I have to go now," he said. But remember what I told you. Take care of yourself and live a good life. I love you, Grandpa, I said. I love you too, kiddo. More than you'll ever know. After that, I never heard his voice again. But I felt different. The heavy sadness that had been crushing me for weeks was gone. I felt peaceful and hopeful for the first time since he had died. I started eating better, sleeping better, and spending time with my friends and family again. I even started dating someone new, something I hadn't been able to think about while I was grieving. Every now and then, I still find small signs that my grandfather is watching over me. My TV will be on the History Channel, or I'll smell coffee in the morning. But now these things make me smile instead of making me sad. Because I know that death isn't the end. It's just a different way of existing. And I know that the people we love never really leave us. They just become invisible guardians, watching over us and guiding us through life. So if you've lost someone you love, don't be afraid. They're still with you in ways you might not even realize. And if you ever hear their voice or feel their presence, don't dismiss it as your imagination. Sometimes the dead have important messages for the living. And sometimes those messages can save our lives. The sleepover. I'm 34 now, a mother of 2 girls. They beg for sleepovers constantly, and I always say no. They think I'm the worst mom ever. They don't understand that when I close my eyes, I'm still in Madison's basement, still 15, still learning that the scariest threats can come from other kids. It was March 2005 in suburban Atlanta. Madison was the queen bee of our sophomore class. Pretty, rich, mean in that way that somehow made people desperate for her approval. When she invited me to her birthday sleepover, I couldn't believe it. Me, the quiet art kid, suddenly included in the popular crowd. My mom was thrilled. She'd been worried about my lack of friends, my tendency to hide in my room drawing. This was progress. This was normal teenage stuff. She drove me over herself, chatting with Madison's mom about how nice it was the girls were including me. There were 8 of us. Madison's inner circle plus a few outer orbit girls like me. Her house was massive, parents asleep upstairs, basement fully finished with a home theater and bar. We watched movies, did makeovers, gossiped about boys. Normal sleepover stuff. Around midnight, Madison announced we were going to play a game. Truth or dare is for babies, she said. We're doing something better. She brought out a bottle of vodka from behind the bar. Her parents' stash. Started pouring shots. Everyone drinks or no one's invited to my pool party this summer, she announced. I'd never drunk before, but the threat of summer social exile was real. I took the shot. It burned. Made me cough. The other girls laughed, but not meanly. We were all in this together. More shots. The room got fuzzy. Warm. Everyone was laughing at everything. I felt like I belonged for the first time all year. Now for the real game, Madison said. It's called Secrets and Lies. Everyone tells a secret. A real one. Something that could ruin you. And if we think you're lying, you have to do whatever we say. The secret started tame. Cheating on tests. Crushes on teachers. But Madison pushed for more. Deeper. Darker. That's kid stuff, she'd say. Tell us something real. Sarah admitted she'd stolen money from her mom. Jenna talked about her dad's affair. The vodka kept flowing. The secrets got worse. When it was my turn, I was drunk enough to be honest. Told them about my older brother. How he'd gone to juvenile detention for dealing drugs. How my family pretended he was at boarding school. How ashamed we all were. Madison smiled. Good one. But I think we need proof you're not lying. What kind of proof? Call him. Right now. Put him on speaker. It's 2 a.m. Secrets and lies, remember? Do it or we'll know you're lying. And liars get punished. I called. My brother answered, confused, angry at being woken up. I was crying, drunk, begging him to just talk to me. He could hear the other girls laughing. Hung up after calling me pathetic. Madison seemed satisfied. We moved on. But something had shifted. The energy was different. Meaner. Ashley was next. Sweet, quiet Ashley who just moved from Ohio. She mumbled something about kissing her cousin once. Boring, Madison declared. And probably a lie. You know what that means. The other girls perked up like sharks smelling blood. Strip, Madison ordered. Down to your underwear. Liars do a fashion show. Ashley looked around desperately. We all looked away. No one was going to help. No one wanted to be next. She stood up, shaking. Started unbuttoning her pajama top. All of it, Madison said coldly. Or should we assume you're lying about other things too? Like being a virgin? Like not being a slut? Ashley stripped to her underwear. Madison made her walk around the room like a runway model while everyone laughed. Someone took pictures. I saw the flash but said nothing. Did nothing. The game continued. Each round worse than the last. More drinking. More secrets. More punishments for perceived lies. By 4 a.m., half the girls were in their underwear. One was locked in the basement bathroom, pounding to be let out. Another was on the phone with her ex-boyfriend, saying humiliating things Madison dictated. Then Madison turned to me again. "You've been too quiet. I think you're hiding something. Another secret. A bigger one." "I'm not." "Liar." She smiled. It was terrifying. "But I'll be nice. You get to pick your punishment. Either you call your brother back and tell him you're in love with him, or..." She held up her phone. "We post these photos I've been taking on Instagram. Tag everyone. Show the whole school what kind of girls you all really are." I was going to be sick. The room was spinning. This wasn't fun anymore. This was something else. "I need to use the bathroom," I managed. "Nice try. Just now." That's when Caitlin threw up. Everywhere. On Madison, on the couch, on herself. The spell broke. Everyone was scrambling, trying to help, trying to clean up. In the chaos, I grabbed my phone and texted my mom, "Please come get me. Emergency. Please." She must have heard something in those words because she texted back immediately, "On my way. Be ready." I grabbed my stuff and headed for the stairs. Madison caught my arm. "Where are you going?" "My mom's coming." I started my period. "Need to go home." She stared at me. Knew I was lying. But Caitlin was still throwing up, and Ashley was sobbing in the corner, and even Madison could see things had gone too far. "Fine. But if you tell anyone about tonight..." "I won't." My mom picked me up without asking questions. Not then. But at home, she took one look at me, drunk, shaking, makeup smeared from crying, and held me while I sobbed. I told her everything the next morning. She was horrified. Called the other parents. Most didn't believe her. Thought she was overreacting. Kids will be kids. Girls that age are dramatic. But Ashley's parents believed. They'd seen the pictures on Madison's Instagram, posted accidentally while drunk, deleted quickly but not quickly enough. Screenshots saved. Evidence gathered. Monday at school was a nightmare. Madison had spun the story. I was a baby who couldn't handle normal teenage fun. A snitch. A loser who'd never really belonged anyway. But Ashley's parents weren't done. They went to the principal. Then the police. Underage drinking. Distribution of child pornography. Cyberbullying. Suddenly it wasn't just teenage drama anymore. The investigation uncovered more. This wasn't Madison's first game. She'd been doing variations for years. Building up dirt on girls. Using it to control them. Some girls had transferred schools. One had attempted suicide. Madison was expelled. Criminal charges filed. The other girls who'd participated were suspended. The whole school was in an uproar. Parents demanding answers. Kids taking sides. We moved that summer. I couldn't handle the whispers, the looks, the "there's the girl who ruined Madison's life" comments. Started fresh at a new school where no one knew about the sleepover. But I knew. Still know. Still remember the basement. The vodka. The secrets. The way we all turned on each other. The way I sat there and watched Ashley strip, watched girls get locked in bathrooms, watched cruelty disguised as a game. In therapy, I learned about mob mentality. About how groups can do things individuals never would. About how one dominant personality can turn normal kids into participants in abuse. But understanding doesn't erase the memory. Doesn't change the fact that I was there. That I drank. That I played along. That I only left when it was my turn to be destroyed. I teach my daughters about consent. About standing up for others. About how no party, no friendship, no social status is worth compromising your values. They roll their eyes. Think I'm being dramatic. They don't understand that I've seen how quickly fun becomes torment. How easily friends become tormentors. How a basement full of teenage girls can become Lord of the Flies with vodka and camera phones. Madison's out there somewhere. Probably married, probably successful, probably hosting dinner parties where she tells charming stories about her wild teenage years. The internet scrubbed clean of her crimes by expensive lawyers and time. But Ashley's out there too. And the girl who tried to kill herself. And all the others who learned too young that cruelty can wear a pretty face and offer you a drink. I was lucky. I got out. I had a mom who listened, who believed, who acted. Not everyone does. So no, my daughters can't go to sleepovers. Can't spend the night in other people's basements with other people's children. Can't put themselves in situations where one cruel person can turn a night into a nightmare. They think I'm overprotective. I know I'm not protective enough. 'Cause I was there. I saw what happens when parents go to sleep thinking their children are safe. I know what really happens in basements at 3 a.m. And I'll never let my daughters find out. The soccer coach. I'm 31 now, coaching youth soccer myself. Every parent who drops their kid off for practice trusts me completely. As they should. I've been background checked, certified, trained in child protection. I follow every rule, every protocol. Because I know what happens when coaches don't. When they use trust as a weapon. When they turn love of the game into something twisted. It was 2008 and I was 14 playing club soccer in Phoenix. I was good. Really good. Olympic development program good. Scouts at tournaments asking about me good. My whole identity was wrapped up in soccer. It was going to pay for college, maybe take me further. Coach Richards ran the elite girls program. British accent, played professionally in Europe, had connections everywhere. Getting onto his team meant you were serious. Going places. He only took the best. When he recruited me from my local team, my parents cried with joy. The fees were astronomical, but they'd make it work. This was my future. Coach Richards would make sure of it. He was demanding but brilliant. Every practice was a masterclass. He saw things in my game I didn't know were there. Under his coaching, I went from good to exceptional. College coaches started calling. The future was bright. The first weird thing was the individual sessions. He said I had potential to be truly special, but I needed extra work. One-on-one training, no extra charge. My parents were thrilled. Such dedication. Such investment in my success. These sessions were different. More intense. He'd demonstrate moves by positioning my body himself. Hands on my hips to show proper form. Adjusting my stance by moving my legs. Always explaining the biomechanics, making it sound scientific. Your body is your instrument, he'd say. I need to understand it to help you. The touching increased gradually. Checking my flexibility by stretching my legs in ways that felt invasive. Massaging my calves to prevent injury. Having me do exercises in just sports bras and shorts so he could see the muscle engagement. I was uncomfortable but didn't know how to object. This was Coach Richards. He'd coached girls who went to Stanford, UNC, the national team. He said this was how elite athletes trained. Then came the away tournaments. He'd book team rooms to save money, he said. But somehow I always ended up having to share with him. Captain's privilege, he'd joke. The other girls would be forward to a room while I had this weird honor of sharing with Coach. He'd walk around in his underwear. Talk to me while he showered with the door open. Act like this was normal. Like I was being immature if I seemed uncomfortable. In Europe, we're not so uptight about bodies, he'd say. Athletes can't be prudish. One tournament in San Diego, everything escalated. We'd won our morning games, had the afternoon off before evening matches. The other girls went to the beach. Coach said I needed to rest, save energy. Insisted I stay in the room. He gave me a sports drink. Said it had electrolytes, would help with the heat. It tasted strange, but I drank it. Started feeling drowsy within minutes. Good, he said. Rest is crucial. Just relax. I lay on my bed, but something was wrong. My limbs felt heavy. My thoughts were sluggish. I couldn't keep my eyes open, but was somehow still aware. I felt the bed dip. He was sitting next to me, then lying next to me, his hand on my stomach. Such perfect muscle tone, he murmured. You're going to be a star. His hand moved up, under my shirt. I tried to speak, to move, but nothing worked. I was trapped in my own body, aware but helpless. Don't fight it, he said. This is part of your development. Trust the process. I don't know how long it lasted. Time was strange. I was there but not there. When I finally could move again, he was back on his bed, reading a coaching magazine like nothing had happened. Feeling better? He asked casually. You were out cold. Heat exhaustion probably. Good thing I was here to keep an eye on you. I ran to the bathroom and locked the door. Stayed there until it was time for warm-ups. Played that evening in a fog, couldn't focus, missed easy shots. He benched me, said I was clearly still affected by the heat. The rest of the tournament was a blur. I avoided being alone with him, stuck close to teammates, slept on the floor of other girls' rooms claiming his snoring kept me awake. He seemed amused by my sudden shyness. Back home I quit. Not immediately. Not dramatically. I just stopped. Claimed injury. Said I needed a break. My parents were confused, concerned. This wasn't like me. Where was their driven daughter? Coach Richards called the house. Spoke to my parents about my potential, my future, how I was throwing it all away. Offered to come over, talk sense into me. I had a panic attack so severe my mom took me to the ER. That's when it all came out. Not coherently. In fragments between sobs. The touching, the hotel rooms, the drink, San Diego. My parents didn't want to believe it. Coach Richards? Impossible. He was so professional, so respected. There must be some misunderstanding. But they saw my terror when his name was mentioned. Saw how I'd gone from loving soccer to being unable to look at a ball. Something had happened. Something had broken their daughter. They went to the club first. Were told I was probably misinterpreting normal coaching methods. That teenage girls often developed crushes on coaches and felt rejected. That Coach Richards had an impeccable reputation. But my mom didn't give up. She reached out to other parents. Found girls who'd quit suddenly over the years. Started making calls. The stories were eerily similar. Extra training. Inappropriate touching explained away as coaching. Hotel room situations. And for some worse, much worse. But no one had spoken up because who would believe them over Coach Richards? We went to the police together. 5 families eventually. The investigation took months. They found evidence on his computer. Photos of players. Videos taken in hotel rooms. A whole system for grooming and abusing girls who just wanted to play soccer. He was arrested at practice. I wasn't there but heard about it. How he tried to run. How some parents still defended him even as police led him away in handcuffs. The trial was brutal. His lawyer painted us as bitter players who couldn't handle tough coaching. As girls who'd misunderstood European training methods. As attention seekers ruining a good man's life. But there were too many of us. Too many similar stories. Too much evidence. He got 20 years. The club shut down. Lawsuits flying everywhere. The soccer community in Phoenix was devastated. Parents questioning everything. Players wondering if their coaches were safe. I never played organized soccer again. Couldn't. The smell of grass and sweat would send me into panic attacks. The sound of a whistle made me want to run. Everything I'd loved about the game was contaminated by him. I went to college on academic scholarships instead. Studied psychology. Tried to understand how someone could use a sport, a passion, a dream as a tool for abuse. Years later, I started playing pickup games in parks. Just for fun. No coaches, no pressure, no tournaments. Slowly remembered why I'd loved it. The joy of movement. The satisfaction of a perfect pass. The beauty of the game itself. That's why I coach now. Little kids just starting out. I teach them soccer, yes. But more importantly, I teach them boundaries. That no one should touch them in ways that feel wrong. That secrets aren't part of sports. That they can always tell their parents anything. I have more certifications than any other coach in our league. Follow more protocols. Keep more distance. Some parents think I'm cold. But the kids trust me. Feel safe with me. Love the game without fear. Coach Richard stole soccer from me for years. Stole my future as a player. Used my dreams against me. But he didn't steal my love for the game itself. Didn't take my ability to help other kids find joy in soccer. Didn't win. Every kid I coach who grows up loving soccer, trusting coaches, feeling safe in sports, that's my victory over him. That's my reclamation of what he tried to destroy. He's in prison. I'm on the field. The kids are laughing, learning, playing without fear. That's the only revenge that matters. The Wilderness Therapy Program. I'm 32 now and I still can't go camping. Can't handle the smell of campfire smoke or the sound of rain on tent fabric. My friends think I'm just not outdoorsy. They don't know that when I close my eyes, I'm back in Utah, 16 years old, learning that sometimes the places meant to help you heal can break you worse than whatever you were running from. It was April 2007. I'd been struggling since my parents' divorce. Drinking, skipping school, hanging with older kids who introduced me to pills that made everything feel better for a while. My grades tanked. Got caught shoplifting. My mom was at her wit's end. The educational consultant she hired painted such a beautiful picture. Wilderness therapy. 8 weeks in nature. Away from negative influences. Professional therapists. Peer support. Kids who'd been through similar struggles. A chance to reset, heal, find myself again. It saved my nephew's life, she assured my mother. These programs work miracles. My mom mortgaged the house to afford it. Thought she was saving me. The morning they came to get me, she hugged me and whispered, "This is because I love you." 2 men and a woman showed up at 4 a.m. Transporters, they called themselves. Told me I could come willingly or they'd restrain me. Said it would be easier if I cooperated. My mom stood in the doorway crying as they led me to their van. The drive to Utah took 2 days. They stopped only for gas and drive-through food. Wouldn't tell me where we were going. Said it was for my own safety. When I tried to text friends, they took my phone. When I resisted, they showed me the restraints they'd use if necessary. The wilderness program was nothing like the brochure. No lodge, no proper facilities. Just a base camp in the middle of nowhere and groups of kids hiking through the desert with untrained guides, who were mostly college dropouts working for minimum wage. They took everything when I arrived. Clothes, jewelry, even hair ties. Gave me ill-fitting hiking boots, military surplus gear, and a tarp. That was home for the next 8 weeks. A tarp. Our group had 8 kids, ages 13 to 17. Some there for drugs like me. Others for depression, defiance, being gay, or just being inconvenient to their parents. We hiked 10 to 15 miles a day carrying 60-pound packs. If you couldn't keep up, you didn't eat. The therapy consisted of weekly visits from a guy with questionable credentials who'd make us do trust falls and talk about our victim mentality. The rest of the time, we were supervised by guides who seemed to enjoy the power they had over us. There was Kyle, early 20s, who'd make the girls do extra exercises in front of him. Claimed it was for physical fitness assessment. Made comments about our developing bodies being soft from privilege. There was Derek, who withheld food if you questioned him. Who'd dump out water bottles if you had an attitude. Who once made a 13-year-old boy hike barefoot for a day because he'd complained about blisters. And there was Marcus. Marcus was the worst. He ran our group like a military unit, up at dawn. Constant drills. Punishments for invisible infractions. But he took special interest in me. Said I reminded him of his ex-girlfriend. Said I needed extra attention to break through my manipulation tactics. The isolation was complete. No phones. Letters to parents were monitored and censored. We were told our parents had signed over temporary custody, that the program had complete control until we graduated. That running away would only extend our time. 3 weeks and I got sick. Really sick. Fever, vomiting, couldn't keep water down. Marcus said I was faking to get out of hiking. Made me carry my full pack anyway. When I collapsed, he had 2 boys drag me to that night's camp. I begged to see a doctor. He said I needed to stop being dramatic. That night, burning with fever, hallucinating from dehydration, I heard him unzip my tarp shelter. Time to check your temperature, he said. What happened next? I can't write it all. Can't relive it all. But I survived it. Survived him touching me while I was too sick to fight. Survived him whispering that no one would believe the drug addict slut over a program guide. Survived him visiting my shelter other nights when I wasn't sick enough to have an excuse. Another girl, Sarah, tried to protect me. Started sleeping next to my tarp. Marcus made her hike point for a week, alone ahead of the group in mountain lion territory. She still did it. Still tried to keep me safe when she could. Week 6, a new kid arrived. His parents had hired a private investigator to check on him. The PI showed up at base camp unannounced, demanding to see the boy. The staff couldn't stop him. He had legal documents. What he found horrified him. Kids malnourished, covered in injuries, some clearly traumatized. He took photos, documented everything. Left with his client's son and promises to return with authorities. They moved us that night. Forced march to a different area. Told us the program was evolving. But we could see the panic in the guides' faces. Something had shifted. 2 days later, helicopters appeared. Search and rescue, police, social workers. The PI had done what he promised. Parents had been contacted. The media was involved. We were being extracted. The investigation revealed everything. Unlicensed staff. Abuse. Sexual assault. Medical neglect. Kids who'd been in the program for months past their supposed end date. At least 2 deaths covered up in previous years. I was airlifted out, hospitalized for severe dehydration and malnutrition. My mother flew to Utah immediately. I'll never forget her face when she saw me, 40 pounds lighter, covered in infected bug bites and untreated wounds, so traumatized I couldn't speak for days. She held me while I finally told her everything. About Marcus. About the nights in my shelter. About how they convinced us we deserved it, that our parents had abandoned us, that this was our only chance at redemption. The program shut down, but most of the guides disappeared before charges could be filed. Marcus vanished. Some said Mexico. Others said he just moved to another program in another state. These places were like whack-a-mole, shut one down, another pops up. We sued. Lots of families did. Reached settlements that required silence. But I'm done being silent. These programs still exist. Still advertise to desperate parents. Still promise transformation through wilderness and tough love. They're not therapy. They're not healing. They're abuse camps that charge $500 a day to torture children in the desert. And parents, good parents who love their kids and want to help them, fall for it. I did heal, eventually. Real therapy. Real doctors. Slowly rebuilt my relationship with my mother, who carries her own trauma from unknowingly sending me to hell. We both have PTSD from it, her from the guilt, me from the experience. I work in addiction counseling now. Real counseling with licenses and ethics and oversight. I help teenagers who are where I was, struggling, self-medicating, acting out their pain. But I help them for real. No desert, no tarps, no Marcus. Sometimes parents ask about wilderness programs. They've heard good things, seen the glossy websites, know someone whose kid was saved by one. I tell them the truth, show them my scars, explain what 8 weeks in the desert really means. Tell them about Marcus and Kyle and Derek, about Sarah standing guard, about kids who didn't make it out. Most listen, some don't. Some still send their children away, convinced that extreme problems require extreme solutions. Those kids come back different, all right, but not in the way their parents hoped. The desert didn't heal me. It broke me in new ways, taught me that asking for help could lead to worse harm, that the people supposed to protect you might be the most dangerous ones of all. But I survived. Sarah survived. Some of us made it out and made lives and now fight to shut these places down. We tell our stories even when it hurts, even when people don't want to hear them. Because somewhere right now, there's a kid in a tarp shelter in the desert. There's a Marcus unzipping the entrance. There's a parent at home thinking they're saving their child. And maybe, just maybe, our voices will reach them in time. Maybe the next 16-year-old struggling with demons won't have to meet worse ones in the wilderness. Maybe Marcus is in prison by now. Or dead. Or running another program under another name. I'll never know. But I'll never stop talking about what he did. What they all did. What they're still doing in deserts and mountains and forests across this country. The wilderness didn't save me. Surviving it did. And I'll keep speaking for those who didn't. I'm 30 now, working as a lawyer specializing in cases involving exploitation of minors. There's definitely a connection between what happened to me at 15 and what I do now. Every case I win feels like retroactive justice for the girl I was. The girl who thought she was about to become a model. The girl who learned that some opportunities are just traps with prettier packaging. It was summer 2009 in Miami. I was tall for my age, awkward, all limbs and angles. Kids at school called me giraffe and skeleton. But somewhere around 15, things shifted. The angles became interesting. The height became statuesque. My mom's friends started commenting on my look. We were at Aventura Mall when he approached. Well-dressed, professional, business card ready. Said he was a scout for elite model management. That I had exactly the look they were searching for. That I could be the next big thing. My mom was skeptical but took his card. Did her research. The agency was real. His name was on their website. Everything checked out. When he called to follow up, she grilled him. He had all the right answers. Offered to meet at the agency office. Bring her along to every meeting. Total transparency. The first meeting was legitimate. Beautiful office in South Beach. Other agents there. Professional photographs on the walls. They took some test shots, said I had incredible potential. Just needed some development. Some coaching. They had a program for that. The program cost money, of course. But they said it was an investment. Professional photos, walking classes, nutrition counseling. All the things that would make me market ready. My parents were divorced, money was tight, but my mom saw the dollar signs. Saw college paid for, saw her beautiful daughter on magazines. She took out a loan. $5,000 for the development program. The classes started normal enough. A group of girls learning to walk, pose, do makeup. But they started scheduling me for extra sessions. Said I needed more work on my presence. These were with the head photographer, Antonio. The scout who discovered me, David, said Antonio was the best. Said he'd launched careers. Antonio's studio was in a warehouse district. Professional but isolated. The first few shoots were standard. Headshots, full body, different outfits they provided. He was all business, barely spoke except to give direction. But the shoots got longer. More outfit changes. The clothes got smaller. Fashion is about the body, he'd say. Can't be shy in this industry. Swimsuits turned to lingerie. Lingerie got skimpier. When I expressed discomfort, he laughed. This is nothing compared to real fashion shoots. If you can't handle this, you're wasting everyone's time. David would sometimes be there, reinforcing the message. This was normal. This was the industry. Did I want to be a model or not? My mom would drop me off and pick me up. I'd tell her things were fine. The photos they showed her were always the appropriate ones. The ones where I looked like a model, not a child playing dress-up in increasingly adult situations. The turning point came during a shoot for their European division. They said European clients preferred edgier work, that this could be my breakthrough. The outfits for this shoot were practically non-existent. "I'm not comfortable," I said, looking at scraps of fabric they called clothes. "Comfort doesn't book jobs," Antonio snapped. He was different that day. Impatient. David wasn't there. It was just us and his assistant, a quiet woman who never made eye contact. I put on the first outfit, if you could call it that, posed how he directed, tried to be professional. But I could see him getting frustrated. "You're too stiff, too American. Europeans want sensuality." He came over to adjust my pose, hands on my body, moving me like a doll. But the touching lingered, moved to places it shouldn't. "Stop," I said. "This is the job," he said. "This is what models do. If you can't handle being touched, you can't handle being dressed by designers, adjusted by photographers, positioned by art directors." He kept shooting, kept touching. The assistant said nothing, did nothing, just adjusted lights when asked. I felt trapped. My mom had paid so much money. Everyone said this was my future. Was I being a baby? Was this really normal? The shoot ended when I started crying. Really crying, not the pretty tears they sometimes wanted for emotional shots. Ugly crying that ruined the makeup. Antonio was disgusted. "Waste of time. Waste of talent. Call your mother." My mom picked me up early. I told her I didn't feel well, that the lights made me dizzy. She was annoyed. These sessions were expensive. I needed to be more professional. At home, I looked at modeling websites, real ones. Tried to find examples of the kind of shoots I'd been doing. But real fashion photography, even edgy stuff, looked nothing like what Antonio had been creating. I found a forum for models, posted anonymously about my experience. The responses were immediate and horrifying. This wasn't modeling. This was a scam at best, something much worse at worst. Real agencies didn't charge for development. Real photographers didn't shoot 15-year-olds in lingerie for European clients. I showed my mom the responses. She didn't want to believe it. We'd spent so much money, done so much research. Everything had seemed so legitimate. But she called the agency, asked to see all the photos from my shoots. They stalled. Said the photos were being processed. Said Antonio was traveling. Said a lot of things that suddenly sounded like excuses. We went to the police. They knew about the agency. It was a real modeling agency. That's what made the scam work. But David wasn't really a scout. Antonio wasn't really their photographer. They'd been using the agency's name, their address, even their website to run their own operation. The investigation uncovered dozens of girls. All tall, all young, all desperate to model. The development program was their con. Take the money, take increasingly inappropriate photos, then either sell the photos or use them to pressure girls into worse situations. Some girls had been told they owed more money for the shoots, that the only way to pay it back was to do private sessions with special clients. When they refused, they were threatened with release of their photos. David and Antonio were arrested. The real agency was horrified, cooperated fully. But the damage was done. I had hundreds of photos out there somewhere. Photos that made me look complicit, willing, even eager. The kind of photos that follow you forever. We sued everyone we could. The fake agency, the real agency for not protecting their name, the building where the studio operated. Collected settlements that mostly went to therapy and lawyers. But money doesn't delete images from the internet. Doesn't erase the memory of Antonio's hands positioning me like meat. I never modeled. Obviously. The very thought of being photographed made me panic for years. Even now, I hate having my picture taken. Hate the sound of camera clicks. Hate the phrase "work it." But I learned to fight back in other ways. Went to law school. Specialized in cases like mine. Now I sue the hell out of anyone who exploits children's dreams. I know their tricks, their justifications, their methods. I know because I lived them. Every few years, I do a reverse image search of myself. Sometimes I find them, those photos posted on sites I can't describe. I file takedown notices. Report to authorities. Play whack-a-mole with my own exploitation. But they're out there. They'll always be out there. Some man's collection. Some website's content. The 15-year-old me, thinking she was about to be a model, frozen forever in positions I never should have been in. David got 5 years. Antonio got 7. Not enough, but something. They're out now. Probably running new scams, finding new girls, selling new dreams that turn into nightmares. But I'm out here too. Warning parents. Educating kids. Taking down operations like there's one lawsuit at a time. They made me a victim at 15. but I made myself a warrior after that. Every girl I saved from a fake scout, every parent I warned about too good to be true opportunities, every predator I helped put behind bars, that's my revenge. I understand you've shared what appears to be a powerful personal narrative about exploitation and recovery. However, I'm not comfortable continuing or expanding on this story, as it deals with very sensitive subject matter involving the exploitation of a minor. If you're interested in exploring themes of resilience, justice, or advocacy work through fiction, I'd be happy to help you create an entirely new story that doesn't involve detailed descriptions of exploitation or inappropriate situations involving minors. Alternatively, if you're working on educational or awareness content about these important issues, I could help you develop resources that focus on prevention, warning signs, or support for survivors, but in a way that doesn't involve continuing this particular narrative. Is there another direction I can help you with instead? The Midnight Visitor. Sarah Miller thought she was hearing things when the soft knocking began at exactly midnight. But after 3 weeks of the same gentle tapping at her front door, she knew something was terribly wrong. Living alone in the quiet suburb of Maple Grove, outside Chicago, Sarah had grown used to the peaceful silence that surrounded her small cottage. The kind of silence that made every creak and whisper seem amplified in the darkness. The knocking always came in the same pattern. 3 soft taps, followed by a pause, then 3 more taps. As if someone was being polite about disturbing her sleep. At first, she convinced herself it was just the old oak tree brushing against her porch, or perhaps a neighborhood cat playing with something on her doorstep. But when she finally worked up the courage to peek through her bedroom curtains during one of these midnight visits, she saw a figure standing perfectly still on her front porch, barely visible in the pale moonlight. The figure appeared to be a woman in a long white dress, her dark hair hanging loose around her shoulders, and she seemed to be waiting patiently for Sarah to answer the door. Sarah's heart raced as she watched the woman lift her hand and tap 3 times, pause, then tap 3 more times, the sound carrying clearly through the quiet night air. When Sarah didn't answer, the woman simply stood there for what felt like hours, never moving, never turning away, just waiting with an endless patience that made Sarah's skin crawl. The next morning, Sarah found no footprints on her porch, no sign that anyone had been there at all, which made her wonder if she was losing her mind or if something far more frightening was happening. She started keeping a journal of the visits, noting the exact time they began and ended, and she noticed that the woman always disappeared just before dawn, fading away like morning mist. Sarah tried staying awake to confront her mysterious visitor, positioning herself by the front window with a cup of coffee and her phone ready to call the police. But somehow, she always fell asleep just before midnight and woke up to find evidence that the woman had been there again. Sometimes there would be small white flowers arranged in a perfect circle on her porch, flowers that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness and disappeared with the first rays of sunlight. Other times, Sarah would find her front door standing slightly open, though she was certain she had locked it before going to bed, and the house would be filled with the scent of jasmine and old roses. Sarah began researching the history of her house, spending long hours at the local library, poring over old newspaper archives and property records, hoping to find some explanation for her midnight visitor. She discovered that her cottage had been built in 1923 by a man named Thomas Hartford for his young bride Eleanor, who had died tragically just 6 months after their wedding. According to the newspaper account, Eleanor had been found in the garden behind the house, wearing her white wedding dress and surrounded by the jasmine and roses she had planted. The cause of death was listed as a heart condition, but Sarah noticed that Eleanor had died on the same date that the midnight visits had begun, exactly 99 years later. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she read Eleanor's story, but she told herself it was just a coincidence, that grief and loneliness were making her imagine connections that didn't exist. However, the visits continued night after night, and Sarah began to notice that the woman on her porch looked exactly like Eleanor in the old wedding photograph she had found in the library archives. Sarah decided to leave flowers on her porch one evening, white jasmine and roses, like the ones Eleanor had loved, hoping that this gesture might bring her some peace or make the visits stop. That night, when the knocking came at midnight, Sarah forced herself to walk to the front door and speak through the wood, telling Eleanor that she understood her sadness and that she was welcome to visit the garden anytime. The knocking stopped immediately, And when Sarah looked through the window, she saw Eleanor standing in the garden, her white dress flowing in a breeze that Sarah couldn't feel. Eleanor turned toward the house and smiled, a sad but grateful expression on her pale face, and then she began to fade away, like smoke in the wind. Sarah thought that would be the end of it, that Eleanor had found the peace she was seeking. But the next night brought a new visitor to her door. This time it was a man in an old-fashioned suit, and his knocking was more urgent, more demanding than Eleanor's gentle taps. Sarah realized with growing horror that she had opened some kind of doorway, that by acknowledging Eleanor, she had somehow made herself visible to other spirits who had unfinished business in the living world. Night after night, new visitors appeared on her porch, each one carrying their own story of loss and longing, each one seeking something that Sarah couldn't understand or provide. There was an elderly man who had lost his wedding ring somewhere in the house, a young child who was looking for her mother, and a soldier who kept asking for directions home. Sarah tried to help each of them, researching their stories and trying to give them what they needed to move on. But for every spirit she helped find peace, two more seemed to take their place. The house began to feel crowded, even when Sarah was alone, filled with whispers and sighs and the soft shuffle of footsteps on floors that creaked under the weight of visitors she couldn't see. Sarah started sleeping with all the lights on, but even then, she could feel their presence, gentle but insistent, like cats rubbing against her legs or children tugging at her sleeves. She considered moving away, packing up her belongings, and finding a new place to live. But she realized that wouldn't solve the problem, because the spirits weren't tied to the house. They were drawn to her. Somehow, by showing kindness to Eleanor, Sarah had become a beacon for lost souls, a living person who could see and hear them when the rest of the world ignored their existence. Sarah began to understand that this wasn't a curse or a punishment, but a responsibility that she had unknowingly accepted, and she decided to embrace her role as a guide for the departed. She converted her spare bedroom into a comfortable sitting area where spirits could rest, while she helped them resolve their earthly concerns. And she started keeping detailed records of their stories and the solutions that brought them peace. Some spirits needed someone to deliver a message to a living relative. Others wanted their belongings returned to their families. And still others simply needed someone to listen to their stories and acknowledge their existence. Sarah discovered that she had a gift for understanding what each spirit needed, and she found a strange comfort in helping them find their way to whatever waited beyond the living world. The midnight visitors became less frightening and more like old friends dropping by for tea and conversation. Though Sarah had to get used to serving invisible guests and talking to empty chairs, her neighbors began to think she was eccentric, this woman who kept strange hours and seemed to talk to herself. But Sarah didn't mind their whispered conversations and curious glances, because she had found her purpose in life. Years passed, and Sarah grew older while her spiritual guests remained unchanged, frozen in the moment of their death, but gradually finding peace through her gentle guidance. She never married or had children of her own, but she felt like she was part of a large, unusual family that spanned the centuries and connected her to stories of love and loss that most people would never hear. Sarah often wondered what would happen when her own time came, whether she would become one of the midnight visitors for whoever lived in the house after her. But she wasn't afraid of that possibility, because she had learned that death was just another doorway, and on the other side were all the souls she had helped find their way home. When Sarah finally passed away peacefully in her sleep, at the age of 93, the house fell silent for the first time in decades, but not for long, because the new owners soon discovered that they had inherited more than just a charming cottage in Maple Grove. They had become the guardians of a place where the boundary between worlds was thin, and where love and kindness could bridge the gap between the living and the dead. The Whispering Woods. Detective James Mitchell never believed in ghost stories until he found the child's shoe hanging from a tree branch deep in Blackwood Forest, and realized that all the missing persons cases from the past 20 years might be connected to something far stranger than human crime. The shoe was small and pink, with tiny flowers embroidered on the sides, and it swayed gently in the autumn breeze, like a gruesome ornament decorating the ancient oak that towered over the forest path. James had been investigating the disappearance of 7-year-old Emma Watson, who had vanished 3 days earlier, while playing in her backyard that bordered the forest, and finding her shoe here, miles from her home, filled him with a dread that he couldn't quite explain. The forest had always made him uncomfortable, even as a child growing up in the nearby town of Millbrook, Connecticut. And local parents had long warned their children to stay away from the dark paths that wound deeper into the woods, where the sunlight never seemed to penetrate the thick canopy of leaves. James carefully photographed the shoe and marked its location with yellow tape. But as he worked, he became aware of a sound that made his skin prickle with unease. A soft whispering that seemed to come from every direction at once. At first he thought it might be the wind, moving through the trees, but the air was perfectly still, and the whispers seemed to form words, though he couldn't quite make out what they were saying. James called for backup and organized a search team to comb through the forest, hoping to find more evidence, or hopefully Emma herself. But as the hours passed and the searchers spread out through the woods, something strange began to happen. The volunteers started reporting that they could hear voices calling their names, luring them off the established paths and deeper into the forest where the trees grew so close together that the world outside seemed to disappear entirely. 2 searchers had to be rescued when they became disoriented and couldn't find their way back to the main trail. Even though they swore they had only walked a few hundred yards from their assigned area, James noticed that the people who had been in the forest the longest began to act strangely, speaking in hushed tones about hearing children laughing and playing just out of sight. And several volunteers reported seeing small figures darting between the trees, always disappearing when they tried to get a closer look. As the sun began to set, James made the difficult decision to call off the search for the day. But he stayed behind with his partner, Detective Sarah Coleman, to gather the evidence, markers and equipment they had left throughout the forest. Working by flashlight, they discovered that several of their carefully placed markers had been moved, arranged in perfect circles around certain trees, as if someone or something had been rearranging them with deliberate purpose. Sarah found a second shoe, this one a small sneaker, that looked like it had been in the forest for much longer than Emma's pink shoe. And then another, and another, until they had collected over a dozen pieces of children's footwear from various locations throughout the woods. Each shoe told a story of a missing child, and James realized with growing horror that Emma was just the latest victim in a pattern that stretched back much further than anyone had imagined. James spent the next day reviewing old missing persons files, and he discovered that children had been disappearing near Blackwood Forest for over a century, with reports dating back to the 1800s, when the area was first settled by European colonists. The pattern was always the same. A child would vanish without a trace, usually while playing near the forest's edge, and despite extensive searches, no bodies were ever found, no ransom demands were made, and no suspects were ever identified. The cases eventually went cold, filed away and forgotten, as families moved away or gave up hope. But James noticed that the disappearances seemed to cluster around certain times of the year, particularly in the autumn, when the leaves were changing and the boundary between day and night grew shorter. James decided to research the history of the forest itself, and he discovered that the land had once been home to a small Native American settlement that had been abandoned under mysterious circumstances in the early 1600s, decades before European settlers arrived in the area. According to the few historical records that survived, the tribal elders had declared the forest cursed after a terrible tragedy befell their children, but the specific details of what had happened were lost to time. James also found references to early colonial reports of strange lights and voices in the forest, and several accounts of settlers who claimed to have seen Indian children playing among the trees, even though no tribes lived in the area anymore. Local folklore spoke of a spirit called the Child Keeper, a benevolent entity that was said to protect lost children by taking them to a safe place where they could play forever, never growing old, never feeling pain or fear. James initially dismissed these stories as superstition, but as he delved deeper into the case, he began to wonder if there might be some truth hidden in the legends. That evening, James returned to the forest alone, armed with a digital recorder and a camera, determined to document whatever was happening in those dark woods. He followed the main trail until he reached the spot where Emma's shoe had been found, and then he sat quietly and waited, listening to the sounds of the forest around him. At first there was only the normal chorus of night sounds, owls hooting and small animals rustling through the underbrush, but gradually he became aware of other noises, softer and more deliberate. James heard the sound of children laughing, faint but unmistakable, and then he saw them. Small figures moving between the trees, like shadows given form. They seemed to be playing some kind of game, chasing each other in circles, and hiding behind the massive tree trunks. And James felt his breath catch in his throat as he recognized one of the figures as Emma Watson, her blonde hair catching the moonlight as she ran and played with her new friends. James called out to Emma, but she didn't seem to hear him, and when he tried to approach her, she faded away like mist, only to reappear moments later, on the other side of the clearing. James realized that he was seeing some kind of echo or imprint, a memory preserved in the forest itself, and he began to understand that the missing children weren't dead. They were trapped in a place between worlds, forever caught in an endless cycle of play and innocence. James spent hours in the forest that night, watching the phantom children and trying to understand the nature of their existence. And he gradually became aware of another presence, something older and more powerful than the lost children. He sensed a maternal energy, protective and loving, but also possessive. And he realized that this was the child keeper of legend, the spirit that had been gathering lost children for centuries, believing that she was saving them from the pain and disappointment of growing up. James understood that the child keeper wasn't evil, but her love had become twisted by grief and loneliness, and she couldn't see that by keeping the children with her, she was causing immeasurable pain to their families. James began visiting the forest regularly, always alone and always at night, building a relationship with the child keeper and trying to convince her to release the children she had collected. He brought offerings of toys and flowers, and he spoke to her as he would to any grieving mother, acknowledging her love for the children, while gently explaining that they belonged with their families. Gradually, the child keeper began to trust James, and she allowed him to see more of her domain, a mystical realm that existed alongside the physical forest, where lost children could play in eternal sunshine, while their families mourned in the real world. James saw Emma there, happy and carefree, but somehow diminished, as if part of her essence was fading away, the longer she remained separated from the living world. James realized that the children were slowly losing their connection to life, becoming more like memories than real people, and he knew that if he didn't act soon, they would be lost forever. James began working with local tribal elders and spiritual advisors, learning about the rituals and ceremonies that might help the child keeper find peace and release her hold on the missing children. The process was slow and delicate, requiring patience and respect for the spirit's pain. But gradually, James began to see signs of progress. The phantom children appeared less frequently, and when they did, they seemed more solid, more real, as if their connection to the living world was growing stronger. Finally, on a cold November night exactly 1 month after Emma's disappearance, James performed the ritual that the tribal elders had taught him, creating a circle of sage and sweetgrass in the heart of the forest, and calling out to the child keeper with words of understanding and forgiveness. The forest grew silent, and then James felt a presence beside him, not threatening, but infinitely sad. And he heard a voice like wind through leaves, speaking words of gratitude and farewell. One by one, the missing children began to appear in the clearing, solid and real, blinking in confusion as they found themselves back in the physical world. Emma ran to James and threw her arms around his legs, crying for her mother, and he held her close, while the other children, some of whom had been missing for decades, slowly remembered who they were and where they belonged. James led them all out of the forest, back to the world of the living, where families were reunited and old wounds began to heal. The child keeper was never seen again, but sometimes, on quiet autumn nights, James could swear he heard the sound of a woman singing a lullaby deep in the forest, a gentle song of love and letting go that carried on the wind like a blessing. And he knew that she had finally found the peace that had eluded her for so many centuries. The midnight train. Railway conductor Thomas Hartwell thought he was dreaming when he saw the old steam locomotive sitting on track 9 at Grand Central Terminal at 3 in the morning, because that track had been abandoned for over 50 years and sealed off from the public. The locomotive was magnificent and terrifying, painted in deep black with silver trim that gleamed in the dim station lighting, and it seemed to pulse with a life of its own, steam rising from its chimney like the breath of some sleeping giant. Thomas had worked the night shift at Grand Central for 15 years, and he knew every inch of the massive terminal, every track and platform and hidden corner, but he had never seen this train before. And according to the duty roster, no trains were scheduled to arrive or depart from any of the platforms until the morning commuter rush began at 5:30. Thomas approached the mysterious locomotive cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the empty terminal. and he noticed that the train seemed to be waiting for something. Its engine running quietly but steadily, as if it were ready to depart at any moment. The passenger cars stretched back into the shadows. Elegant vintage coaches with brass fittings and curtained windows that glowed with warm yellow light. And Thomas could see silhouettes moving inside, passengers settling into their seats for what appeared to be a long journey. Thomas tried to find the engineer or conductor, someone who could explain what this train was doing here and where it was supposed to be going. But when he climbed up into the locomotive cab, he found it empty except for a brass nameplate that read "The Eternal Express" in elegant script. The controls were unlike anything Thomas had ever seen. A mixture of modern technology and Victorian-era craftsmanship, with gauges and levers that seemed to operate according to principles he didn't understand. Thomas heard the sound of voices coming from the passenger cars. Conversations carried on in hushed, respectful tones, and he decided to investigate further. Walking back along the platform to peer through the windows of the first coach, what he saw made his blood run cold, because the passengers were dressed in clothing from different time periods. Victorian ladies in elaborate gowns, sitting next to men in 1940s suits. Children in old-fashioned knickers playing quietly, while their parents watched with sad, patient expressions. Thomas realized with growing horror that these passengers looked translucent, like images projected on smoke, and he began to understand that he was looking at something that shouldn't exist in the physical world. Thomas backed away from the train, intending to report what he had seen to his supervisor. But as he turned to leave, he heard a voice calling his name, a familiar voice that made his heart skip a beat. Standing in the doorway of the last passenger car was his father, Robert Hartwell, who had died in a railway accident 10 years earlier, and who now stood smiling at his son with the same gentle expression that Thomas remembered from his childhood. Robert beckoned for Thomas to come closer, and despite every instinct telling him to run, Thomas found himself walking toward the train, drawn by a longing to speak with his father one more time. Robert explained that the Eternal Express was a special train that appeared at Grand Central once each month, always on the night of the new moon, to collect passengers who had unfinished business with the living world. The train served as a bridge between life and death, allowing spirits to visit their loved ones one last time before continuing their journey to whatever lay beyond. Robert had been riding the train for 10 years, waiting for the right moment to say goodbye to Thomas and to explain the truth about his death, which hadn't been the accident that everyone believed. Robert revealed that he had discovered evidence of corruption in the railway company, safety violations that put passengers at risk, and he had been planning to expose the truth when someone decided to silence him permanently. The accident had been carefully arranged to look like mechanical failure, but Robert had seen his killer's face in the moments before the locomotive derailed, and he had spent a decade trying to find a way to bring justice to the living world. Thomas listened to his father's story with a mixture of grief and anger, and he promised to investigate the claims and expose the truth, no matter how long it took or what the personal cost might be. Robert smiled and embraced his son, and Thomas felt the warmth and love that he had missed so desperately since his father's death. But he also felt the strange coldness that clung to the spirits on the train, the chill of the space between worlds. Robert explained that Thomas had a choice to make. He could board the Eternal Express and join his father on the journey to whatever came after life, or he could remain in the living world and carry out the mission that Robert could not complete. The decision had to be made before dawn, because that was when the train would depart, and it would not return to Grand Central for another month. Thomas spent the remaining hours of the night walking through the passenger cars, listening to the stories of the other spirits who rode the Eternal Express. He met a young woman who had died in the 1918 flu pandemic and wanted to reassure her surviving family that she was at peace. An elderly man who had lost his life savings to a con artist and needed someone to warn others about the same scam. And a child who had drowned in the Hudson River and wanted her parents to know that her death wasn't their fault. Each passenger had a story of love and loss, of things left unsaid and wrongs left unrighted. And Thomas began to understand that the train served a vital purpose, providing closure and comfort to both the living and the dead. Thomas also met the train's conductor, a tall, thin man in an old-fashioned uniform, who introduced himself as Mr. Graves and explained the rules that governed the Eternal Express. The train could only appear in places where the boundary between worlds was thin, And Grand Central Terminal was one of the most powerful crossing points in North America. Built on land that had been sacred to Native Americans for centuries before the first European settlers arrived. The spirits who rode the train were those who had died with strong emotional connections to the living world, and they were given one final opportunity to resolve their earthly concerns before moving on to their eternal rest. Mr. Graves warned Thomas that if he chose to board the train, he would be giving up his life in the physical world, but he would also be joining a community of souls dedicated to helping others find peace and closure. Thomas felt torn between his desire to be with his father and his responsibility to the living world, and he knew that this was the most important decision he would ever make. As dawn approached, Thomas made his choice, and he stepped down from the train onto the platform, promising his father that he would continue the work that Robert had started and expose the corruption that had led to his death. Robert smiled proudly and told Thomas that he would always be watching over him, and that they would be reunited someday. When Thomas's own journey in the living world was complete, the Eternal Express began to move slowly out of the station, its whistle echoing through the empty terminal like a song of farewell. And Thomas watched until the last car disappeared into the tunnel that led away from Grand Central. Thomas spent the next several years investigating his father's death, following clues and gathering evidence, while continuing to work his night shift at the terminal. He discovered that Robert had been right about the corruption, and he eventually exposed a network of officials who had been cutting corners on safety inspections and maintenance in order to increase profits. The scandal led to criminal charges, prison sentences, and major reforms in railway safety procedures. And Thomas felt that he had honored his father's memory by bringing the truth to light. Every month, on the night of the new moon, Thomas would wait on Platform 9 for the Eternal Express to appear, and sometimes he would catch a glimpse of the mysterious train sliding silently through the terminal, carrying its cargo of souls toward their final destination. Thomas never saw his father again, but he often felt Robert's presence during difficult moments, a gentle guidance that helped him make the right choices and stay true to his mission. Thomas eventually retired from the railway and became an advocate for transportation safety, traveling around the country to speak about the importance of proper maintenance and regulation. And he always ended his presentations by talking about the people who had died unnecessarily and the families who had lost their loved ones to preventable accidents. Thomas lived a long and productive life, helping to save countless lives through his advocacy work. And when his time finally came, he passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by family and friends who knew him as a man of integrity and compassion. On the night after Thomas's funeral, railway workers at Grand Central Terminal reported seeing an unusual sight on Track 9, an old steam locomotive sitting quietly in the shadows, its brass fittings gleaming in the dim light. And through the windows of the passenger cars, they could see two figures embracing, a father and son, finally reunited after years of separation, ready to continue their journey together into the mystery that awaits us all beyond the boundaries of the living world. And the train pulled slowly out of the station, carrying its precious cargo toward a destination that no living person could imagine, but that every soul would eventually discover. The arrival. Sarah Matthews drove her small car along the winding coastal road. The fog was getting thicker with each mile. She could barely see the yellow lines on the asphalt now. The job posting had been simple. Lighthouse keeper needed. Remote location. Good pay. Must be comfortable with solitude. After her divorce, solitude sounded perfect. She turned left at the weathered sign that read Beacon Point 2 miles. The road became narrower. Gravel crunched under her tires. The lighthouse appeared through the mist like a ghost. It stood tall and white against the gray sky. Sarah parked her car and stepped out. The ocean roared somewhere beyond the fog. She could smell salt in the air. The wind was cold against her face. An old man waited by the lighthouse door. He wore a thick wool coat and a knit cap. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless. "You must be Sarah," he said. His voice was rough like sandpaper. "I'm Henry. I've been keeping the light going until you arrived." Sarah shook his weathered hand. "Thank you for staying. I know you wanted to retire." Henry nodded slowly. 40 years I've been here. Never missed a night." He looked up at the lighthouse. "The ships depend on us, you know. This coast is dangerous in the fog." He led her inside. The lighthouse was clean but old. Everything was wood and brass and the smell of oil lamps. There was a small kitchen, a bedroom, and a living area with a stone fireplace. The light mechanism is up top, Henry explained as they climbed the spiral stairs. It's automated mostly, but you need to check it every night. Make sure it's working proper. At the top, Sarah gasped. Even through the fog, she could see the ocean stretching endlessly. The lighthouse beam swept across the water in steady circles. Beautiful, isn't it? Henry said. But dangerous too. See those rocks out there? Ships have been breaking apart on them for over 100 years. Sarah watched the light make its endless journey, around and around, never stopping. There's something else, Henry said quietly. Something I need to tell you before I go. Sarah turned to look at him. His pale eyes seemed worried. Sometimes you'll hear things at night. Voices calling from the water. Don't listen to them. Don't go outside when you hear them. What kind of voices? Sarah asked. Henry was quiet for a long moment. The voices of people who died in the water. They call to the lighthouse keeper. They want the light turned off. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. That's just superstition, right? Henry looked at her seriously. 40 years I've been here. I've heard them every night, calling my name, begging me to turn off the light. Promise me you won't listen. Sarah nodded, though she didn't really believe him. I promise. Henry smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Good. The supply boat comes every 2 weeks. Radio's in the kitchen if you need help. But mostly you'll be alone. They went back down the stairs. Henry gathered his few belongings. At the door he turned back. One more thing. There's a diary in the bedroom. The woman before me kept it. Her name was Margaret. She left suddenly. Might be worth reading. What happened to her? Sarah asked. Henry's face grew dark. No one knows. One day she was here, the next day she was gone. We found her diary, but... He trailed off. But what? Some of the entries were dated after she disappeared. Made no sense. Henry shook his head. Probably just got the dates wrong. Easy to lose track of time out here. With that, Henry walked to his old truck and drove away. Sarah watched his taillights disappear into the fog. Then she was alone. The first night. Sarah spent the afternoon exploring her new home. The lighthouse was simple but had everything she needed. The radio worked. The generator hummed quietly in the basement. The light turned automatically as the sun went down. She found Margaret's diary in the bedroom drawer. It was a simple black book with a leather cover. Sarah opened it to the first page. Day 1 finally arrived at Beacon Point. The lighthouse is beautiful. I think I'm going to like it here. The solitude will be good for my writing. Sarah smiled. Margaret had been a writer too. That's why Sarah had taken this job. She needed quiet to finish her novel. She read a few more entries. Margaret wrote about her daily routines. Checking the light. Reading books. Walking on the beach when the fog lifted. It all sounded peaceful. As night fell, Sarah made herself dinner. She could hear the ocean better now. The waves crashed against the rocks below with a steady rhythm. The lighthouse beam swept across her windows every few seconds. Around 10 o'clock, she decided to check the light like Henry had shown her. She climbed the spiral stairs to the top. The mechanism was working perfectly. The beam cut through the fog like a sword. Sarah stood there for a while, watching the light make its circles. It was hypnotic. Around and around, never stopping, never resting. That's when she heard it. A voice, faint and distant, calling from somewhere in the fog. Sarah. Sarah. She froze. The voice seemed to come from the water. It sounded like a woman, though she couldn't be sure. Sarah, please. Sarah gripped the metal railing. Her heart started beating faster. It was probably just the wind, she told herself. Wind and waves could make strange sounds. But the voice came again, clearer this time. Turn off the light, Sarah. Please turn off the light. Sarah backed away from the windows. She remembered Henry's warning. Don't listen to the voices. Don't go outside. She hurried down the stairs and locked the lighthouse door. The voice continued calling for another hour before it finally stopped. Sarah lay in bed that night, listening to the ocean. Every time the lighthouse beam swept past her bedroom window, it cast moving shadows on the walls. She pulled the blankets over her head and tried to sleep. The diary's secret. The next morning dawned clear and bright. The fog had lifted, and Sarah could see the ocean sparkling in the sunshine. Everything looked normal and peaceful. She made coffee and stepped outside. The lighthouse sat on a rocky cliff about 50 feet above the water. There was a narrow path that led down to a small beach. Sarah could see the dangerous rocks Henry had pointed out. They jutted up from the water like black teeth. The morning was so beautiful that Sarah almost convinced herself she had imagined the voices. Almost. She spent the day writing and exploring. There were tide pools full of sea creatures. Seagulls called from the rocks. The lighthouse beam wasn't visible in the daylight, but she could hear the mechanism turning. That evening, Sarah continued reading Margaret's diary. Day 15, I heard voices last night. A woman calling my name from the water. Henry warned me about this, but I thought he was just trying to scare me. The voice sounded so sad, so desperate. Sarah's coffee grew cold as she read. Day 16, the voices came again. This time I could make out words. She was begging me to turn off the light. She said ships were supposed to crash on the rocks, that it was their fate. Sarah flipped ahead a few pages. Day 23, I saw her today. A woman in a white dress standing on the rocks below. She was there when I woke up, just standing in the surf. When I looked again, she was gone. Day 24, she's not alone. I counted 3 figures on the rocks this morning, all wearing white, all staring up at the lighthouse. Sarah's hands trembled as she turned the pages. Margaret's handwriting became more frantic as the days went on. Day 30, they're not just voices anymore. I can see them clearly. Men and women in old-fashioned clothes. They stand in the water and point at the lighthouse. Their faces are so pale, so sad. Day 35, I understand now. They died in shipwrecks. The lighthouse saved other ships, but it couldn't save them. They're angry. They want revenge. Day 40, I think I'm going crazy. The voices never stop now. Day and night, they beg me to turn off the light. Just for one night, they say. Just long enough for one ship to crash. Sarah closed the diary. Her heart was pounding. She looked outside, but it was still daylight. The ocean looked peaceful and blue. She flipped to the last entry in the diary. Day 45, I can't take it anymore. The voices, the faces in the water. They follow me everywhere. I'm going to turn off the light tonight. Just for a few hours. Maybe then they'll leave me alone. The entry was dated 3 months ago. But Henry had said Margaret disappeared 3 months ago. Sarah turned the page. There was one more entry written in different ink. Day 100, I should have listened to them. I should have turned off the light when they asked. Now I'm one of them. Now I stand in the water and call to the lighthouse keeper. The new one will come soon. Maybe she'll listen. Maybe she'll understand. Sarah dropped the diary. The entry was dated 2 months in the future. That was impossible. She grabbed the diary again and checked the date. There was no mistake. The handwriting looked like Margaret's, but how could she have written about things that hadn't happened yet? Unless... Sarah ran to the window. The sun was setting and fog was rolling in from the ocean. Soon it would be dark. Soon the voices would come. The truth in the water. That night, Sarah didn't go to the top of the lighthouse. She sat in the kitchen with the radio turned up loud, trying to drown out any sounds from outside. But the voices came anyway. Sarah, Sarah. This time there were more of them. Men and women calling her name. Their voices seemed to come from all directions. Please, Sarah, turn off the light. Just for one night. Let the ships come to us. Sarah covered her ears, but she could still hear them. The voices grew louder and more desperate. We've been waiting so long. We're so cold in the water. Help us, Sarah. Help us rest. Sarah looked up at the ceiling. Above her, the lighthouse beam continued its endless rotation. She could hear the mechanism turning, the motor humming. All she had to do was climb the stairs and flip a switch. The light would go out. The voices would stop. But ships might crash on the rocks. People might die. Sarah gripped the kitchen table and tried to think clearly. The voices couldn't be real. Dead people don't call from the ocean. Margaret's diary entries couldn't be dated in the future. She was having a breakdown. The isolation was getting to her. That was the only logical explanation. The voices continued all night. Sarah didn't sleep. When dawn came, the voices faded with the darkness. Sarah stumbled outside. The fog had lifted again and she could see the ocean clearly. The water was empty. No figures in white dresses. No faces staring up at her. But as she watched, something white washed up on the beach below. Sarah hurried down the rocky path. The white object was caught in the seaweed near the shore. As she got closer, she realized what it was. A dress. An old-fashioned white dress, the kind women wore 100 years ago. The fabric was torn and stained with salt water. It smelled like the deep ocean. Sarah picked it up with trembling hands. Inside the dress collar was a small tag with a name written in faded ink. Margaret Ashworth, 1923. 1923. That was over 100 years ago. Sarah dropped the dress and ran back up to the lighthouse. She grabbed Margaret's diary and flipped through it frantically. She was looking for Margaret's last name. There it was on the first page, Margaret Chin, freelance writer. Margaret Chin. Not Margaret Ashworth. Sarah's mind raced. There had been more than one Margaret. The Margaret who kept the diary wasn't the first woman to work at this lighthouse. How many lighthouse keepers had there been over the years? How many had heard the voices? How many had disappeared? That afternoon, Sarah tried the radio. She needed to talk to someone. She needed help. Coast Guard, this is Beacon Point Lighthouse. Do you copy? Static filled the kitchen. Then a voice came through. Beacon Point, this is Coast Guard Station Millfield. What's your situation? This is Sarah Matthews. I'm the new lighthouse keeper. I need some information about the previous keepers here. Stand by, Beacon Point. Sarah waited. Finally, the voice came back. Beacon Point, we show that Henry Caldwell was the keeper for 40 years. Before him was Margaret Chin. She disappeared 3 months ago. What about before Margaret? Were there other women keepers? Stand by. Another long pause. Beacon Point, our records show several keepers over the past century. Margaret Ashworth in 1923. She disappeared after 6 weeks. Sarah Whitmore in 1945. Also disappeared. Jennifer Cole in 1967. Same story. Sarah's blood went cold. They all disappeared? That's what the records show. Beacon Point has a high turnover rate. Isolation is hard on some people. But what happened to them? No one knows. They just vanished. Usually left everything behind. Sarah thanked the Coast Guard and turned off the radio. She sat in the quiet kitchen thinking. All women. All disappeared. And now the voices were calling to her. She opened Margaret's diary again and read the final entry. Day 100, now I'm one of them. Now I stand in the water and call to the lighthouse keeper. What if Margaret hadn't written that entry before she disappeared? What if she had written it after? What if the voices in the water were real? The choice. As the sun set on her third night, Sarah climbed to the top of the lighthouse. She needed to see for herself. She needed to know the truth. The lighthouse beam was working perfectly. It swept across the darkening water in steady circles. Fog was rolling in from the ocean. Sarah waited. As full darkness fell, she heard them. The voices calling from the water. Sarah. Sarah. But this time Sarah looked. She pressed her face to the glass and stared down at the ocean. In the beam of the lighthouse, she could see them. Figures standing in the water near the rocks. Women in white dresses. Their faces were pale and sad. Their hair floated around them like seaweed. Sarah counted them. 5 women standing in the surf. All looking up at the lighthouse. All calling her name. As she watched, one of them raised her hand and pointed at the light mechanism. Her mouth moved, but Sarah couldn't hear the words over the wind. Turn it off. That's what she was saying. Turn off the light. Sarah backed away from the windows. This was impossible. Dead people couldn't stand in the ocean. This had to be a hallucination. But as she watched, more figures appeared. Men in old-fashioned suits. Children in Victorian clothing. Dozens of people standing in the water, all pointing at the lighthouse. The voices grew louder. Please, Sarah. We've been waiting so long. Just turn it off for one night. Let us rest. Sarah looked at the light mechanism. There was a simple switch on the control panel. All she had to do was flip it and the light would go out. But if she did that, ships might crash on the rocks. More people might die. More voices might join the chorus in the water. Sarah ran down the stairs to the kitchen. She grabbed the radio. Coast Guard, this is Beacon Point. Emergency. Static answered her. Coast Guard, please respond. More static. The radio was dead. Sarah checked the connections. Everything looked fine. But no matter what she did, she couldn't raise anyone. She was alone. The voices continued outside. Louder now. More desperate. Sarah looked at Margaret's diary, still open on the kitchen table. She flipped to the last page again. Day 100, maybe she'll listen. Maybe she'll understand. Understand what? What was Margaret trying to tell her? Sarah read through the diary again, looking for clues. Margaret had been a writer just like her. Margaret had come here for solitude just like her. Margaret had heard the voices just like her. But Margaret had disappeared. Unless... Sarah grabbed a pen and opened the diary to a blank page. She started writing. Day 3, Sarah Matthews. The voices are real. The figures in the water are real. They're the ghosts of people who died in shipwrecks. They want me to turn off the lighthouse so more ships will crash. She paused. Was she going crazy? Was she really writing in a ghost's diary? The voices outside grew even louder. Sarah could hear them through the walls now. Sarah, please, help us. Turn off the light. Sarah continued writing. I think I understand now. Each lighthouse keeper who disappeared didn't really disappear. They joined the voices in the water. They became part of the calling. Sarah's hand trembled as she wrote. But why? Why would they want more people to die? She thought about it. About Margaret Chin and Margaret Ashworth and all the other women who had vanished from this lighthouse. Maybe they weren't trying to cause more shipwrecks. Maybe they were trying to warn her. Sarah wrote faster. What if the voices aren't asking me to turn off the light? What if they're showing me what will happen if I stay? What if they're trying to save me? The lighthouse beam swept past the kitchen window. Outside, the voices reached a crescendo. Sarah, you have to leave. You have to get away from here. That's what they were saying. Not turn off the light. They were telling her to run. Sarah dropped the pen and ran to the window. In the lighthouse beam, she could see the figures clearly now. They weren't pointing at the light mechanism. They were pointing at the road. They were pointing away from the lighthouse. They were telling her to escape. The pattern. Sarah understood now. The lighthouse itself was the trap. She ran upstairs and started packing. She threw clothes into her suitcase. She grabbed her laptop and her car keys. The voices outside were frantic now. Hurry, Sarah. Before it's too late. You still have time. Sarah ran to her car. The fog was so thick she could barely see the road, but she didn't care. She had to get away from the lighthouse. She started the engine and backed up. As she turned around, her headlights swept across the ocean. The figures in the water were waving at her, urging her on. Sarah drove as fast as she dared through the fog. The gravel road seemed to go on forever. Finally, she reached the main coastal highway. She drove to the nearest town and checked into a motel. Only then did she feel safe enough to think clearly. The lighthouse was cursed, or haunted, or something worse. It drew women to it, isolated them, and then made them disappear. But why only women? And what exactly happened to them? Sarah opened her laptop and started researching. She found old newspaper articles about the lighthouse, about the missing keepers. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Every female lighthouse keeper who disappeared had been found eventually. Their bodies had washed up on beaches miles away. All of them had drowned. But here was the strange part. They were always found wearing old-fashioned white dresses. Dresses from decades or centuries before their time. Margaret Chin had been found wearing a dress from the 1920s. Sarah Whitmore had worn a Victorian gown. Jennifer Cole had been found in a dress from the Civil War era. It was as if they had been claimed by the sea. As if they had joined something ancient and terrible. Sarah thought about the diary. About Margaret's final entry, dated in the future. What if time worked differently at the lighthouse? What if the women who disappeared were pulled into some kind of loop, doomed to repeat their drowning forever? Sarah made a decision. She would go back to the lighthouse one more time. Not to stay, but to warn whoever came next. The warning. The next morning, Sarah drove back to Beacon Point. The fog had lifted, and the lighthouse looked peaceful in the sunshine. She parked her car but kept the engine running. She wasn't staying long. Inside the lighthouse, everything was exactly as she had left it. Margaret's diary was still open on the kitchen table. Sarah's pen was lying beside it. Sarah sat down and continued writing. Day 4 I escaped. The voices in the water weren't trying to lure me to my death. They were trying to warn me. They were the spirits of the women who died here, trying to save me from the same fate. The lighthouse is cursed. It calls to women, isolates them, and then claims them for the sea. I don't know why. I don't know how. But I know it's real. If you're reading this, you're probably the next lighthouse keeper. If you're a woman, you're in danger. Leave now. Don't stay here. Don't listen to anyone who tells you the voices aren't real. The Coast Guard will find another keeper. A man probably. Men seem to be safe here. It's only women who disappear. Please, learn from our deaths. Run while you still can. Sarah signed her name and dated the entry. Then she left the diary open on the table where the next person would find it. She took one last look around the lighthouse. It really was beautiful. In the daylight, it was hard to believe anything supernatural could happen here. But Sarah knew better now. She walked back to her car and drove away. In her rearview mirror, she watched the lighthouse grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared behind the trees. Sarah never went back to Beacon Point. She moved to a city far from the ocean and found a job at a newspaper. She tried to forget about the lighthouse and the voices in the water. But sometimes, on foggy nights, she would wake up to the sound of women calling her name. Epilogue. 3 weeks later, a young man named David Park arrived at Beacon Point Lighthouse. He had taken the job because he needed the solitude to write his thesis. David found Sarah's warning in the diary. He read it with amusement. Ghosts in the water? Cursed lighthouses? It sounded like something from a horror movie. David was a practical man. He didn't believe in supernatural nonsense. He settled into the lighthouse and began his new routine. Check the light every night. Radio the Coast Guard every few days. Enjoy the peace and quiet. David never heard voices calling from the water. He never saw figures in white dresses standing on the rocks. The lighthouse beams swept across the ocean every night, and nothing strange ever happened. David kept the lighthouse for 2 years. He finished his thesis and got his degree. When he left Beacon Point, he was alive and healthy. The Coast Guard found a new keeper to replace him, a retired Navy officer named Robert Chin. Robert had 40 years of experience with lighthouses. He knew all about isolation and solitude. Robert settled in quickly. Like David, he never heard voices from the water, never saw ghosts on the rocks. The lighthouse was peaceful and quiet. But Robert did find something interesting in the bedroom drawer. A black diary with a leather cover. It was full of entries from previous lighthouse keepers. Most of the entries were from women. Margaret Ashworth, Sarah Whitmore, Jennifer Cole, Margaret Chin, Sarah Matthews. All of them had written about voices in the water. All of them had disappeared. But there were also entries from men. Henry Caldwell had kept detailed records for 40 years. David Park had written about his thesis work. None of the male keepers had mentioned anything supernatural. Robert read Sarah's final warning with interest. He was a logical man and he saw the pattern clearly. The lighthouse wasn't cursed. It was just dangerous for women who lived there alone. The isolation, the constant sound of the ocean, the endless fog, it was enough to drive anyone to hallucinations. Women, being more social creatures, were more susceptible to the psychological effects of extreme solitude. The voices were probably just the wind and waves. The figures in the water were likely hallucinations brought on by sleep deprivation and stress. The women who disappeared had probably suffered complete mental breaks. They had walked into the ocean during episodes of psychosis. The old-fashioned dresses found on their bodies were probably just debris from old shipwrecks, caught on the corpses as they floated in the sea. It was tragic, but it wasn't supernatural. Robert made a note in the margin of the diary, recommends psychological evaluation for all future female applicants. Position unsuitable for women due to isolation factors. Then he closed the diary and put it back in the drawer. That night, Robert climbed to the top of the lighthouse to check the mechanism. The beam was working perfectly. It swept across the dark ocean in steady circles. Robert looked down at the water. It was empty and black. No voices called to him. No figures stood on the rocks. The lighthouse was just a lighthouse. The ocean was just an ocean. Robert smiled and went back downstairs to make himself a cup of tea. Far below, in the dark water near the rocks, 5 women in white dresses watched him go. They had called to Sarah Matthews until she escaped. They had tried to warn her, just as they had tried to warn all the others. But the men never heard them. The men never saw them. The men never needed to be warned. Margaret Ashworth adjusted her waterlogged dress and sighed. The new keeper was a man. He would be safe. He would live. But someday another woman would come to the lighthouse. Another woman would hear their voices. Another woman would see their faces in the water. And they would try again to save her. They would call her name through the fog. They would point toward the road that led away from the sea. They would beg her to run before it was too late. Because that's what the dead do for the living. They try to warn them. They try to save them. Even when the living cannot hear their cries. The lighthouse beam swept across the water, and the women in white dresses faded back into the depths. But they would return tomorrow night. And the night after that. They would wait for the next woman to come. And they would try once more to save her from the sea.